From Bloomberg's European headquarters in London, I'm Anne-Marie Hordern. This is Bloomberg Green. Now, for your roundup of this week's latest climate news, Jennifer Zabazaja has your Green in Brief.
Here's the climate news you need to know. Deforestation of the world's largest rainforest has hit a 12-year high. More than 4,000 square miles of the Amazon rainforest was destroyed in 2020. That's a 9.5% increase from a year earlier. Government data shows that destruction has soared since President Jair Bolsonaro took office and weakened environmental enforcement. The Amazon is home to millions of species and plants and is critical in the fight against climate change. Bitcoin is hitting all-time highs, but at what cost to the environment? The cryptocurrency is energy intensive, and there are concerns if it becomes mainstream. According to MIT, back in 2018, Bitcoin's carbon footprint was almost as big as Portugal's. Want to get better at tackling climate change? We'll hire more women. That's according to Bloomberg New Energy Finance. Firms with 30% or more women in top jobs tend to perform better when it comes to the environment and are more likely to set clear climate goals. Shopping online is more popular than ever now, but the price of convenience is measured in CO2, and more deliveries means more fuel burned and more packaging wasted. So what can companies do? Well, many are becoming more efficient and sourcing more clean energy for their data centers and warehouses. And England's farmers will be paid to go green after Brexit. As European subsidies are phased out, they'll get new money to encourage them to produce healthy, sustainable food. Poor farming practices are one of the leading drivers of water pollution and the loss of biodiversity. I'm Jennifer Zabazaja in New York. Anne-Marie, back to you.
The shipping industry is more than just the grease on the wheels of globalization. It's its chief enabler. 11 billion tons of goods are transported by ship each year, the biggest contributors being 2 billion tons of oil, 1 billion tons of iron ore, and 350 million tons of grain. According to the International Chamber of Shipping, 80% of Europe's imports and exports happen over the seas. And for such a vast industry, it also contributes its fair share of emissions. Shipping makes up 12% of global transport energy consumption. So how does it clean up its act? Earlier, I caught up with Bloomberg Green reporter Laura Milan about just how big of a challenge this is going to be for the industry.
One of the main issues is size. So about 90% of the world's cargo is moved by ships. So obviously changing such a huge industry is not going to be fast and it's not going to be easy. The second issue has to do with technology. So ships obviously travel for many days at sea. It's not as easy for them to refuel as it would be for a car, for example, going on a road. And the sector still hasn't found a technology that's economically viable and that's zero emissions and equivalent to the electric batteries for cars, for example.
But actions are being put in place to make the industry a bit more environmentally friendly. Walk us through those steps that they're taking.
That's it. So there's a first step that would involve using low emission fuels or biofuels that would significantly reduce the existing emissions. And then at a regulatory level, when it comes to the policy and the governments, there are steps being made as well. I would say that the most significant ones come from the European Union, which started to track emissions a few years ago and is now looking to include shipping emissions in the emissions trading system. So that would significantly reduce and help calculate the emissions from the shipping industry. Now, China is taking similar steps. So at the moment, regions need to report shipping emissions to the central government. And finally, we have the International Maritime Organization with a pledge to reduce shipping emissions by 50% in 2050. Now, we must say that that pledge has been considered insufficient by environmental groups, but at least some steps are being taken.
So to get to 2050, the industry obviously is going to need to start tapping some new technologies. What new technologies are you seeing being introduced into the shipping industry?
So we have seen pilot technologies being developed for years now, but what's interesting about this current moment is that we're seeing big players invest in these technologies that are not yet economically viable, but that one day might be. So for example, we are seeing earlier this year, the world's largest agricultural commodities trader, Cargill, saying they will invest in attaching sails to their ships so they can make any technology that they run their ships on more efficient. Similarly, we have seen a spin-off of Airbus, the aeronautics company, developing a similar application with kites. We have been following also developments in hydrogen. So at the moment, hydrogen fuel seems like a good option, a possible option when it has been developed and when it becomes economically viable. And we have Vestas, for example, the world's largest turbine maker, developing some ships that will be able to run on hydrogen in the near future.
Coming up, rising sea levels means humans need to get creative when it comes to coastal defenses. But how do we protect both ourselves and the environment? One Israeli startup may have the answer. That's coming up next. This is Bloomberg Green. In London, I'm Anne-Marie Hordern. This is Bloomberg Green. After water, what's the resource that humans use the most? It's concrete, 3 tons a year for every person on the planet. And engineers estimate it's used twice as much as all other building materials combined. And it comes with a huge environmental cost. Concrete, not just in cities, it's a common feature on our coastlines too. And that's taking a toll on biodiversity. But one Israeli startup has found a way of making sea defenses stronger and encouraging life to thrive.
If you take a look at concrete structures like breakwaters or seawalls, water around them is often clear. That's not actually a good thing, because it means there's no life. Marine species are actually most abundant in coastal areas, but it's also where us humans prefer to live too. So when we build here, we drive away marine life.
The concrete in the marine world has a lot of additives, a lot of chemicals, and some of those materials are actually leaching out, and they're actually prohibiting marine life to thrive. If we keep developing without any regards to natural communities, there is a tilting point from which beyond we cannot really go back.
In the coastal city of Tel Aviv, an Israeli startup wants to revolutionize our urban coastlines. Their sea defenses are transforming lifeless man-made structures into teeming ecosystems. They do this by replacing standard concrete with their own special cement formulas.
As opposed to regular cement-based concrete, e-concrete includes certain elements that enhance the growth of marine flora and fauna of plants and animals. Our admix, which is kind of our secret sauce, is basically kind of sealing the concrete, making it less aggressive for the marine environment. That once we add it, we enable life to flourish.
In the lab, the team run tests to identify what mixes will work best for marine life.
So we take really ice cube sized concrete slabs of different compositions, and we put larvae, 20, 30, 50. We need to have a lot of replicates. We're geeky scientists, so we have to have a lot of replication and controls. And then within a few days or just a few weeks, we can get an answer on their preference. So obviously, if they die, they have a very low tolerance to that specific concrete mix design. And if they thrive or they flourish, we can quantify that very quickly.
E-Concrete says it typically sees double the biodiversity of regular grey concrete. From fish and sea caterpillars on their armour blocks to crabs on these tidal pools that sit on the shoreline.
This unit holds water during the low tide, so it's always moist, and therefore it has a very comfortable habitat for crabs and sea anemones and sea stars, etc. These pools have been here for less than 3 months, and this is already what you can see. It's covered with life. See the rock around it, which has been here for probably 10, 20, maybe even more years, only has a thin layer of green algae, and that's it.
As well as the composition of the cement mix, E-Concrete designs its products specifically to the marine environment it will be deployed, to create niches for endangered species, or to develop nurseries like these oyster beds. The final part of the equation is creating complex surface textures to mimic natural rock or coral, an environment that helps anchor young organisms.
When concrete elements are being cast, the typical goal is to have a very slick surface, very, very smooth. The idea is to get the water to flow right across it. When we're designing E-Concrete with a rough surface, we want to do the complete opposite. We want to slow the water when they are crossing the structure so that the larvae can actually adhere and attach to the surface.
E-Concrete has to offer its clients more than just ecological credentials. Over time, they've discovered that creating hospitable habitats for marine life adds another advantage, one that is surely hard to ignore.
We've seen evidence to the fact that the growth of the organisms on the concrete create kind of a layer of defense. Just the addition of weight, we can actually gain stability and strength over time.
This is let's say the unit when we put it in the water. And this is after a year in the water. And what you can see here is all the oysters are completely covering it. We designed the units so they can withstand the forces and perform in terms of structural performance, but they can also be a backbone for ecological enhancement.
The company tests its miniature designs in tanks full of real seawater, rocks, plants, and animal life from around the world.
What we're looking for is the accumulation of calcium carbonate on the surface of the concrete of different mixes and different designs. This is the process we call it biogenic buildup. So with time, we get a buildup of calcium carbonate that is sourced from marine organisms on the surface of the concrete. And we actually encapsulate the concrete with a natural rock. So when the organism die, in case of a coral, it will die, and then another coral will sit on it, and that's how a reef is growing.
The hope that our man-made structures could become stronger over time also means better economics. The units require less maintenance and could therefore stay in the water for longer. E-Concrete, though, is just a few years old, so it needs more time to really quantify the longevity of its products. But the company are certain their products are better for the environment, and not just in terms of improving biodiversity.
We're kind of trying to offset some of that immense carbon footprint of the concrete industry.
Construction is responsible for about 11% of global carbon emissions. By adding a biological crust to their products, E-Concrete prevents some CO2 from being released into the atmosphere.
For every kilogram of calcium carbonate being created by those marine organisms, we're offsetting 120 grams of CO2. So think about building a port infrastructure or a city waterfront that is an active carbon sink. I think that's a great advantage of the technology.
That does it for this week, but let's keep the conversation going on Twitter. Follow us at Climate. I'm Anne-Marie Hordern, and this is Bloomberg Green.
Satellite Radio Channel 119. This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Bloomberg Quick Takes Tim Stanovic on Bloomberg Radio.
Live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio, streaming on YouTube. It is Thursday, Friday's Eve.
That's what we call it here.
That's how we roll. February 4th, 2020. And listen, we've been saying all week, it has been a different week. We don't have the meme stock frenzy.
I'm still talking about it, and we're going to still talk about it today, Carol.
We are, because there's a great story in the magazine just about it.
Yeah, lots to unpack.
The lingo.
I know.
Who knew, right?
Attendees and stonks.
And stonks. All right, let's get you going, though, on this Thursday with a check on the trading day. Here is Charlie Pellet.
Hi, thank you very much. Happy Thursday to you both. We are looking at records right now as stocks extend their rally into a fourth day. Traders sifting through a flurry of corporate results amid signs that the U.S. labor market may be gradually improving. Right to the numbers. We've got the S&P ahead of the jobs report tomorrow, up 32 points now, up by just about 0.9%, on track for a record close. Right now, the S&P is at 3862. The Dow pushing higher, up 267 points, up 0.9%. NASDAQ up 120. That is a gain of just about 0.9%. 10-year yield 1.13% now. Gold is down 2.3%, $17.92 the ounce. Silver tumbling 2.1%. West Texas Intermediate crude up now by 1%, $56.26 for a barrel of West Texas Intermediate crude. Netflix shares up more than 3% on news that the company is raising the price of its service in Japan, bolstering revenue in an increasingly key market for the streaming giant. Recapping, S&P pushing higher, up 32 right now, up 0.9%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Yes, indeed. Thank you so much. There's your market setup. Carol Masser, Tim Stanovic in our Interactive Brokers studio. Let's bring in the team. Let's set the Business Week agenda on this Thursday. Mike McKee with us, international economics and policy correspondent at Bloomberg News, on the phone in New York City. Dave Wilson, stocks editor at Bloomberg News, on the remote access from New Jersey. We're going to get a little bit more on that rally in just a moment. We've got some interesting questions for Dave. In the meantime, though, Mike, it's your day. It's Thursday. It's weekly jobless.
Yeah, it's not very exciting this week. We did have
Don't undersell it, McKee.
It's a little bit of an improvement, but it's sort of like saying one team's up 49-0 and they give up a field goal. I mean, we went to 779,000 initial jobless claims from 812. So, yeah, it's an improvement, but we're still more than 100,000 above where we were at the worst part of the Great Recession. So this is still a labor market that's in a lot of pain, and people are still losing their jobs and filing for benefits. We always caution that the number itself may not be completely accurate because of fraud or double counting, but it is still a very big number, and it is still a problem for the labor economy.
Mike, does it offer any sort of preview for how you may be thinking differently about tomorrow's numbers that we're expecting?
No, this is last week. The jobs numbers were come out, the job survey is taken the week that includes the 12th, and claims were elevated then. But we've had some other better news since then, including both of the ISMs, the manufacturing and services, suggest that hiring picked up in January, and also the ADP numbers were much higher than anticipated. Now, none of those are particularly good predictors of an accurate number, but it has caused economists to raise their forecasts to 100,000 jobs. We also have a seasonal effect where in November and December you hire a lot of retail workers and truck drivers, and they may or may not come off the payrolls this month if they were actually there because of the COVID firing. So it's going to be a little bit of a hard report to read.
We're going to talk to Carl Riccadonna tomorrow, but he's already got a preview out of the jobs report. Set the jobs decoder to K, meaning we're going to see that divergent track in tomorrow's employment report. All right, Dave Wilson, you've been so patient. Come on in on today's rally. What a different week it is.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, what's interesting today, maybe the most telling sign of how much strength there is in stocks right now, you look at the worst performers on the day in the S&P 500, and you see a couple of chip makers that had results out late yesterday. Qualcomm down about 9%, biggest drop in the S&P 500. Not far behind Corvo, down more than 5.5%. And yet, when you turn to the Philadelphia Semiconductor Index, it's actually higher. It's just that kind of a day. I mean, 10 of the 11 main industry groups in the S&P 500 are up. The one exception being, materials. And there you had a couple of disappointing results, namely out of international paper and air products and chemicals. So there are certainly some cases in which companies haven't delivered. But then the flip side, you look at the likes of PayPal and eBay. Their shares are up close to 7% in the wake of their results from late yesterday. People like what they saw there, and there are a few other examples like that.
Russell 2000 totally outperforming other indexes that we're looking at right now. Dave, earlier this week, if I recall, there was a chart that you sent focused for your chart of the day on the Russell 2000 losses being seen as just a start.
Yeah, well,
what's going on here?
How things sort of work out. Nobody's perfect, I guess.
Yeah.
But one thing you can say is that what we're seeing today is more in line with what we saw late last year and early this year. Now with the Russell up almost 2%, look at 2020. I mean, it's up 11.5%, and that's close to 4 times as much as the S&P 500. So we have seen that kind of shift. If nothing else, it sort of paused the last few days, and today it seems to be coming back on here.
Yeah, small caps though, really playing catch up after a few years of underperformance if you go back a ways. Mike McKee, final thoughts. When you look at, though, as you said, we're getting some data points that maybe start to think or make us think that things are getting better. And I put that out there with the context of the president trying to put through another COVID relief package. Do we still need it based on the statistics you're seeing?
Oh, yes, definitely. We have another, when you look at the non-seasonally adjusted numbers, another 1 million people filing for jobless claims this week or this last week. And those people are still probably going to be out of work come the middle of March. And in the middle of March, the extended unemployment benefits run out. So we still need a lot of help for the economy. And there are all kinds of industries, particularly in the service industries, where jobs have just gone away. So people are going to be without work for a long time, and the economy is going to be struggling. We'll see growth rates on a percentage basis that are strong, but we'll be way off of where we should be in terms of GDP and in terms of output for quite some time.
All right, going to leave it on that note. Hey, guys, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Our Michael McKee, international economics and policy correspondent at Bloomberg News on the phone in New York City. Dave Wilson's going to be back a little bit later on with his new chart of the day and his stock of the day. He's stocks editor at Bloomberg News. So how's your day been going?
It's been going well.
What have you been talking about?
We've been talking about a lot. I'm excited to speak to our good friends at Bloomberg Business Week, Pat Regnier. We had him on the show on Quick Take. This story is so fun. Yeah. And Joel Weber's going to be joining us, of course, Bloomberg Business Week editor. But this story does such a good job of weaving everything that happened in the last 10 days together.
Right.
And also contextualizing it when it comes to market history and how this is different from what we saw in the 90s.
Right, but explains how it kind of came to be. I mean, I really loved it. It's because I do feel like the last couple of weeks or last week, we've been all, racing to understand the platforms, the chat rooms, what's been going on, how come the platforms had problems, and then the clearinghouses, and he really puts it all together beautifully.
And there's, of course, the terms that have become stonks and tendies. We can ask him about that too.
Yeah, it has a chicken tender connection. I'm just going to put that out there. What else? We've got Bill Bratton coming up, former NYC and Boston Police Commissioner, former chief of the LA Police Department. We're going to talk security at the big game, the Super Bowl. It is this week. Normally, we would be at Radio Row, or we might be at Radio Row doing a bunch. I know it's virtual, kiddo, this year.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's going to happen. Okay, we'll have to wait till next year to do that.
Exactly. Especially when it's in a warm place like Florida. All right, let's get to the Bloomberg Business Week Bite of the Day. Tim, it is one number that tells us a lot. Today's number, $155 million.
That's right. Wine startup Vivino raised $155 million to expand into new countries, add staff, and build out its recommendation engine after more than doubling wine sales during the pandemic.
Gotta say, I use this app. Wine sales on Vivino's platform more than doubling in 2020 to $265 million as consumers shut out of bars and restaurants. We know this. We've talked about this. They bought bottles online to drink at home. That drove the San Francisco-based company, which suggests wine based on price, pairing brings a region and lets users buy it on its app to its first break-even annual performance. I love it. You can take a picture of the label. It can tell you where to buy it. It gives you reviews. I love it.
I got to try it.
I will show it to you. All right, let's get to Nancy Lyons for a check on World and National News. Hey, Nance.
Hey, Carol. House impeachment managers want to hear from former President Trump himself. They are requesting that he testify in his Senate impeachment trial scheduled to begin next week. In a letter to Trump, they say if the invitation is declined, that refusal would support a strong adverse inference regarding his actions January 6th. Well, the House of Representatives is voting today on whether to remove Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia from her committees because of her extreme views, like her belief in QAnon conspiracy theories. A compromise short of stripping her committee assignments could not be reached. In remarks today on the House floor, Greene disavowed her past support for QAnon.
These were words of the past, and these things do not represent me. They do not represent my district, and they do not represent my values.
The Democrat-led House can pass the vote with a simple majority. The vote will decide whether Greene can stay on those committees. President Biden is spending his afternoon at the State Department. He told the gathered diplomats and workers that he knows it's been a tough few years, but he hailed them as America's best.
But you're an incredible group of individuals. And I've said many times over the years, those of you who are stationed overseas and have been stationed overseas, you're America's face. You're what people see in the country you are. They look at you. You are the face of America.
Biden told them America is back and diplomacy is back. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Nancy Lyons.
All right, Nance, thank you so much. So a bunch of stories, as there always are, on COVID and the vaccine. We've got dozens of U.S. states releasing vaccines left over from a federal initiatives for nursing homes. So they are increasing the supply. It sounds like putting it out there for other eligible people like essential workers and seniors. I think that's really important, that this is kind of maxing me out. Like if you got it and you're not using it, let's get it out to other people.
Yeah, look, I mean, there are a lot of reasons in different states why the vaccine rollout is going slowly. But what some areas have found is that, hey, we don't need as much as we thought we would need in certain places. Let's open up availability and get as many people to get it as possible.
It's like supply and demand working. Like, okay, where's the supply? Where's the demand? Let's move it around as needed. So I think it's really important. We did see and hear from New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio saying that New York City hospitalizations did surge after the snowstorm. So, yeah.
Yeah, not good news there. But at the same time, we are starting to see some encouraging news, not just here in the city, but around the country as well. I got to tell you, Carol, the Bloomberg vaccine tracker is...
You love this.
I love it. Yeah, it's fantastic. I mean, it's a great use of data, but they add a new feature to it, and it gives you an idea of, based on where you live, what state you live in, when your state will reach herd immunity based on the number of months and on the number of vaccines given per day. So it really varies a lot. You have some states like Idaho, for example, which is not doing very well, 20 months at the rate that it's going right now.
Right.
But state like North Dakota, it could take just about 8 or 9 months.
Wow, still a long time though.
It is still a long time.
Wow, but listen, and this is what it's all about, is getting, as many vaccines out so that we can get to those herd immunity levels. It's interesting too, there's another story by our Tim Lowe about Israel. The U.S. is on pace to vaccinate 75% of its population against COVID this year, while Canada could take almost a decade, but this also digs into, kind of globally what we are seeing, U.S. and Israel years ahead of Europe in the early race for COVID shots. It just shows the differences globally.
Right. And look, we should note that this is happening. This is the pace of vaccinations right now. That's expected to increase.
Exactly, and change. But we need the vaccines to get out globally in order for really the global economy to ultimately reopen. This is Bloomberg.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. Stocks are climbing amid a small cap rally. Jobless claims hit the lowest since November as COVID cases ebb. eBay and PayPal climb on upbeat forecasts while Qualcomm is slumping. Here's where we stand. S&P 500 index up 32 now at a record, up 0.9%. The Dow up 274, up 0.9. NASDAQ is up 120, up by 0.9%. The Russell 2000 up 1.9%. Gold is down $41 the ounce now at $17.92, down 2.3%. As for silver, it is lower now by 2.2%. West Texas Intermediate crude up 1.1%, $56.29 for a barrel of West Texas Intermediate crude. Qualcomm down 9% after last night's earnings report. eBay up now by 6.9%. PayPal also up by 6.9%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. So Tim and I just worked out, and went over some of the big headlines about leftover vaccines and getting them out to people. Global virus cases now topping 104.5 million, deaths surpassing 2.2 million. We've had more than 108 million COVID shots given around the globe. So let's get into our virus guest. Great to have joining us once again, Dr. William Moss. He is Executive Director of the International Vaccine Access Center, Professor in the Departments of Epidemiology, International Health, and Molecular Microbiology and Immunology at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, which, as you know, is supported by Michael R. Bloomberg, founder of Bloomberg LP and Bloomberg Philanthropies. Dr. Moss, back with us on the phone from Baltimore. Bill, nice to have you here once again on Bloomberg. So I got to say, I'm starting to feel optimistic because I know people in my world that are getting the vaccine. It looks like the flow is opening up. Tell me how you're seeing it. What are you seeing in terms of COVID cases and then the vaccine getting out to people?
Yes, thanks, Carolyn. It's my pleasure to be back with you. So we are seeing some positive signs. It doesn't mean we can let our guard down. Particularly with a Super Bowl coming, and we don't want another super spreading event. But we are seeing case numbers come down in the United States. Yesterday, 119,000 cases. That's down from about 250,000 cases in early January. So we're really down on cases. We are still seeing tragically high numbers of deaths. The death numbers always kind of lag the case numbers by a couple weeks. We're still at about 3,800 deaths yesterday, so that's obviously still tragically high. Our test positivity around 8%, still much higher than we'd like it, but we are seeing the case numbers come down. And as you pointed out, we're getting more vaccines out. Over 55 million doses distributed. We've gotten over 34 million doses into arms. That's about 60% of those distributed. We're doing much better in getting vaccines doses into people. And I think this combination of, the case numbers come down, if that we continue that trend and continue to do better and better in getting people vaccinated, we may be seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. But again, that's not going to be for a couple more months. People still need to practice their good public health measures.
Yeah, it's amazing to hear you rattle off these statistics because it's all relative, right? I mean, we're in a worse place than we were in a few months ago, but a much better place than we were in a few weeks ago. So I guess context is everything. I do wonder about the new strain, Bill, because this decline in numbers that we're seeing is also coming at a time where in recent weeks we've heard about the discovery of new and potentially more transmittable strains.
You're exactly right, Tim. And the surge that we saw probably in throughout January was probably related to the holidays and holiday gatherings, and so we're seeing that fall off. But you're exactly right. These new variants of the virus that are more transmissible, and particularly of concern, there's some suggestion that perhaps they may cause more severe disease and may be able to escape some of the protective immunity conferred by our vaccines. Not completely, and we think these vaccines are still going to be really good about preventing severe disease, hospitalizations, and death. But we need to be on guard, and we need to be ready for increasing circulation in our communities of these more transmissible virus variants. So that is something we're going to have to watch very carefully.
And that's what we're worried about, that these variants being more contagious, right? And circulating, as you said, more easily and more quickly, that even though we're vaccinating, if we don't have enough of our population vaccinated, that can create a whole other wave.
Yes, you're right, and it's why it's so urgent right now. Before these variants, these more transmissible variants, become the dominant viruses circulating in our communities, that we do everything we can to decrease the transmission of this virus. And that includes, as quickly as possible, getting more people vaccinated and really doubling down on our public health measures to prevent transmission. The more this virus transmits, the more it's going to mutate and create further problems for us. So I think we have a short window of time right now to really try to clamp this down.
What's the best way to increase vaccine distribution? Because at the current rate we're going right now, which is about 1.34 million vaccines each day, it will take months to reach 75% immunity in this country.
Right. There are a number of steps that can be taken, and I think the Biden administration is working on this. I think of it in kind of the 4 Ds, doses, delivery, demand, and data. And so we certainly need to increase the number of doses. There are limitations on how many vaccines can be manufactured, but there are efforts to increase the number of doses, purchase more doses for the U.S. population, and also bring on, hopefully in the next few weeks, maybe new vaccines, such as the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. We're waiting for the results of their phase 3 trial. We need to improve our delivery. That's increasing the number of vaccinators, increasing the number of sites where vaccines are being delivered. We're already seeing a lot of progress on that front. And then on the demand side, we need to make sure that we target our public health messaging to those communities that have mistrust or are skeptical of the vaccines and build that trust.
Doses, delivery, demand, and data. Did I get it right? That's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
We're going to continue with Dr. William Moss in just a moment. Over at Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, we'll continue our conversation. Got a few more questions I want to ask him.
Yeah, what do you want to focus on?
He talked about a short window. I want to know how short between getting vaccines out and dealing with those variants.
Broadcasting live to New York, Bloomberg 1130. To Washington, D.C., Bloomberg 99.1. To Boston, Bloomberg 1061. To San Francisco, Bloomberg 960. To the country, Sirius XM Channel 119. And around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Business Week.
You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Master along with Tim Stanovic. We're going to get back to Dr. Bill Moss over at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. Got a few questions still.
Yeah, a lot of questions. Let's talk more vaccines, too.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, first up, though, back to your top business stories and another look at that trading day. Hey, Charlie Pellet.
Well, hello there. We're looking at records on the S&P. Stocks extending their rally into a fourth day. Traders sifting through a flurry of corporate results amid signs that the American labor market may be gradually improving. We get the jobs report tomorrow morning, 8:30 a.m. Wall Street time. Complete coverage and analysis right here on Bloomberg Radio and Television. S&P on track for a record. Banks, industrial, and technology shares leading today's gains. Here's where we stand. The S&P 500 index up now by 33 points, a gain of 0.9%. The Dow up 273, up 0.9. NASDAQ up 121, higher by 0.9%. We've got the 10-year yield 1.13%. Gold is down 2.3%, tumbling $42 the ounce to $17.92. Silver also lower today. Silver futures down by 2.2%. West Texas Intermediate crude oil up 1%, 56.23 for a barrel of WTI. Bottom line here, S&P on track for a record. The University of Oxford is set to begin a trial combining COVID-19 vaccines from AstraZeneca and Pfizer that could provide greater flexibility in the use of scarce supplies. Pfizer shares up now by 0.2%, AstraZeneca higher by 0.5%. A major issue in the U.S. continues to be getting doses into people's arms. Dr. Jason Farley is a nursing professor at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health.
It's particularly troubling when we hear a lot of data emerging where a lot of people are hesitant to get the vaccine. For example, if you look at long-term care facilities, where only about 30 to 40% of the workers in long-term care facilities across the U.S. have reported receiving the vaccine out of their own choice. Not that they weren't offered it, they just were hesitant to do so.
The Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health is supported by Michael R. Bloomberg, founder of Bloomberg LP and Bloomberg Philanthropies. Among some of the vaccination names, looking at BioNTech, lower by 0.2%, Moderna higher by 3.2%, Johnson & Johnson up now by 0.8%. Lots of earnings after the bell among the companies reporting: Peloton, Gilead Sciences, T-Mobile, and Pinterest. Recapping, S&P at a record up 33, up 0.9%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thanks so much. Just crossing the Bloomberg, Chobani eyeing a 2021 IPO, targeting up to $10 billion in terms of evaluation. This is coming from Dow Jones. The IPO market, Tim, continues to roll along.
Do I have to recuse myself from coverage of Chobani?
Because you like it?
Because I like it. Just a standards question.
You just need to put it out there.
Okay. I like it.
All right, let's get back to Dr. William Moss, professor of epidemiology over at Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, executive director of the International Vaccine Access Center, on the phone from Baltimore. As we like to remind you, the Bloomberg School of Public Health, of course, supported by Michael R. Bloomberg, founder of Bloomberg LP and Bloomberg Philanthropies. Dr. Moss, one thing I wanted to follow up on, you said something about having a short window to get the vaccines out before these virus mutations really pick up a lot of momentum. How short is that window?
Yes, Carol. You know, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention predicted that the variant that we know scientifically as B.1.1.7, that was first identified in the United Kingdom, would become the dominant virus variant in the United States in March, in mid-March. So I would say we really need to decrease the transmission in this country, over the next 4 to 8 weeks, and that's going to include getting really increasing the number of people vaccinated, as well as continuing our basic public health measures.
There was a really interesting story by the Associated Press that came out this morning, Bill, that talked about the need to vaccinate around the world and not just focus on country by country. The International Federation of the Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, they found that the 50 poorest countries have received only 0.1% of total vaccine doses that have been administered worldwide so far. Here's why that matters, though. Because that inequality, according to them, could potentially backfire to a deadly and devastating effect, because areas of the globe that remain unvaccinated could allow the virus to spread and mutate. So even if somebody is vaccinated against a strain, that could be developed in another country, right?
Yes, this is a really important point, Tim. And, you know, obviously the pandemic has been particularly tragic in the United States, and the United States certainly has the highest case numbers and deaths. But we also need to be looking globally and ensuring equitable access to vaccines around the world. That's really hard right now when vaccine supply is scarce. But there are efforts led by the World Health Organization to procure vaccines through a number of mechanisms and from a number of vaccine manufacturers, and be able to ultimately provide enough doses to 20% of the population in all countries around the world, and particularly they're focused obviously on the low and middle income countries. But you're right, this is a global pandemic, and unless we have a global effort, we're not going to stop it. And this virus has shown us that it can mutate more quickly than I think many experts anticipated. And if there's ongoing transmission in parts of the world, everyone's impacted by that.
Yeah, absolutely. What is, in terms of the headlines that you're focusing on right now, what are they?
Yes, I think the big one is the concern around the new variants that are both more transmissible and potentially we have vaccines that are less effective. We've seen, for example, in the trials of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine and Novavax vaccine, that they do have reduced efficacy against the variant that was first identified in South Africa. Fortunately, they still seem to protect against severe disease, and that should be our number one goal. We want to stop hospitalizations and stop deaths.
And that was something that came up in the conversation we had with J&J's Chief Scientific Officer just about 1 week ago. Hey, Bill, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Dr. William Moss, he is Professor of Epidemiology at Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, of course, as you know, supported by Michael R. Bloomberg, founder of Bloomberg LP and Bloomberg Philanthropies. Bill, also the Executive Director of the International Vaccine Access Center, joining us once again on the phone from Baltimore. Listen, it's interesting, Tim, to just kind of follow how our conversations have progressed over the last year of, dealing with the virus, learning about it, learning about new treatments, the search for a vaccine, the pursuit of one, getting the vaccine, distribution, but now we're talking about the variants.
We are, and it's so interesting because I got to tell you, so much focus has been on a country-by-country basis or even a block-by-block basis when it comes to rollout of this vaccine, as if, like, borders care about this virus.
Right.
We know that's not the case. And I hadn't thought about it in the context of why it's so important to vaccinate the entire world at the same time, because you want to prevent the virus from mutating, because then you could get reinfected if you've already been vaccinated. So it makes no sense to just vaccinate on a country-by-country basis.
It's a really, really important point, because the longer it's able to linger among populations and find hosts, it's going to see those mutations. And you're right, as a result, then how do we ever ultimately get ahead of it? And so this is why, when we see vaccines that don't necessarily have to be refrigerated or it's not 2 doses, this is why something like the J&J vaccine is seen largely as helping some of those much more remote areas of our world.
Yeah, that and AstraZeneca as well, especially vaccine that doesn't have to be stored at really low temperatures or need 2 doses.
Correct.
When you have the mRNA vaccine here in the United States and in other parts of the world, 2 doses has to be stored at a very cold temperature.
Right. It's a lot more complicated, the logistics and distribution of it. And also, once you have a vaccine out, it's kind of shelf life, if you will. Like the clock is ticking pretty quickly. But this is what has been the strategy from day one, is that everyone has said it's why we need multiple companies working on multiple vaccines, because we're going to need all of it if you want to get to the billions of people around the world and really get COVID under control.
We on Quick Take earlier today, my colleague Jen Zabasaja interviewed the CEO of the company Zipline. And they do drone delivery in remote areas of the world, including in Rwanda. And they're going to be working to deliver vaccine to these hard-to-get-to areas, which is just, when you think about logistically, right, how difficult it is to get vaccine to developed areas, right? areas where they're difficult to reach, those have to be reached as well.
Right, exactly. And, this is what's been tricky about, around the globe. You've had different countries, different strategies. And to some extent, I think about the cover story of the magazine, which talks about, 5 key points in order to get ahead of the next pandemic. Because, folks, it's going to come. But one of the points was really kind of thinking about this and working together on a global level.
Yeah, one of the headings included thinking differently about the World Health Organization,
right?
Getting ties back to the World Health Organization, and this being a global issue.
Right, exactly. And listen, this is something that we've already heard, certainly from the Biden administration. They got that, almost from the get-go when it came to their plan about dealing with the pandemic and COVID-19. As soon as he and his team were in the White House, they were talking about this global strategy, talking about being part of the World Health Organization. Because part of it is, too, and we go back to kind of day one of when we learned about it and how we learned about it, because the sooner you know about it or the sooner that you put situations and strategies and plans in place, you can deal with it. And this is something that we're hoping. We didn't have the playbook 1 year ago. We do have somewhat of a playbook. And so this is something we want to deal with. All right, let's take you to the State Department. President Biden is getting ready to make some comments. First, we're going to hear from the head of the Secretary of State, Tony Blinken. So let's take you in.
Tremendous happiness. President Biden, Vice President Harris, welcome to the State Department. For more than 2 decades, I've had the privilege of watching President Biden at work. I've seen his commitment to the American people, his expertise in foreign policy, his steadfast belief in diplomacy, and his rock-solid support for our diplomats and development experts. I've seen him on the Hill, in the Oval Office, in distant world capitals from Baghdad to Bagram, Paris to Peoria, and visiting our troops, visiting our diplomats, visiting all the men and women representing this country. And I can say without fear of contradiction that in the history of the presidency, no one has brought as much foreign policy experience to the job as Joe Biden. Wherever he goes, he's been a champion for American leadership and a defender of American values. And in Kamala Harris, he has a vice president, we have a vice president, with a long track record of standing up for the security of the American people, and an abiding commitment to using diplomacy to advance our interests and defend our values around the world. At this moment of unprecedented global challenge, it's more important than ever that the United States show up and lead, because the world simply doesn't organize itself to solve big problems, and the well-being of the American people hangs in the balance. We need diplomacy to get the pandemic under control worldwide, to save American lives and livelihoods. We need diplomacy to address the climate crisis, to protect communities across our country. We need diplomacy to check the rise of authoritarianism, to prevent the spread of dangerous weapons, to shore up democracy, to defend human rights, all of which makes the world more stable and free, and all of which protects the security and prosperity of the American people. Foreign policy is domestic policy. And because our strength at home determines our strength in the world, domestic policy is foreign policy too. President Biden and Vice President Harris know this better than anyone. That's why they believe so strongly in the work that we do at the State Department. And they've made it clear that the first question we must ask ourselves here at State is, how will this benefit our fellow Americans? How will this policy answer their needs? How will this outreach reflect their values? How will this initiative make their lives just a little bit better? We're going to hold ourselves to that standard every step of the way. President Biden and Vice President Harris have come here today at the very start of their administration to make sure we know that we have their support. And that means a great deal to all of the men and women of the State Department. We will do our best, Mr. President, Madam Vice President, to make you proud. And with that, it is my pleasure to introduce the President of the United States, Joe Biden.
So, of course, we just heard from the Secretary of State, Tony Blinken. They're just preparing, as we are in a COVID world, cleaning the podium before the president steps up. Here is President Biden.
Mr. Secretary, it's great to be here with you. And I've been looking forward a long time to be able to call you Mr. Secretary. Good afternoon, everyone. It's an honor to be back at the State Department under the eyes of the first American chief diplomat, Benjamin Franklin. And by the way, I want you all to know in the press, I was the Benjamin Franklin Professor of Presidential Politics at Penn. And I thought they did that because I was as old as he was, but I guess not. Anyway, all kidding aside, it's great to be here and stand alongside our most recent senior diplomat, Secretary Tony Blinken. Mr. Secretary, thank you for welcoming us today. We've worked together for over 20 years. Your diplomatic skills are respected equally by your friends and our competitors around the world. And they know when you speak for me. And so is the message I want the world to hear today. America is back. America is back. Diplomacy is back at the center of our foreign policy. As I said in my inaugural address, we will repair our alliances and engage with the world once again, not to meet yesterday's challenges, but today's and tomorrow's. American leadership must meet this new moment of advancing authoritarianism, including the growing ambitions of China to rival the United States and the determination of Russia to damage and disrupt our democracy. We must meet the new moment accelerating global challenges, from the pandemic to the climate crisis to nuclear proliferation, challenging the will only to be solved by nations working together and in common. We can't do it alone. We must start with diplomacy, rooted in America's most cherished democratic values, defending freedom, championing opportunity, upholding universal rights, respecting the rule of law, and treating every person with dignity. That's the grounding wire of our global policy, our global power. That's our inexhaustible source of strength. That's America's abiding advantage. Though many of these values have come under intense pressure in recent years, even pushed to the brink in the last few weeks, the American people are going to emerge from this moment stronger, more determined, and better equipped to unite the world in fighting to defend democracy, because we have fought for it ourselves. Over the past few days, we've been in close cooperation with our allies and partners to bring together the international community to address the military coup in Burma. I've also been in touch with Leader McConnell to discuss our shared concerns about the situation in Burma, and we are united in our resolve. There can be no doubt, in a democracy, force should never seek to overrule the will of the people or attempt to erase the outcome of a credible election. The Burmese military should relinquish power they have seized, release the advocates and activists and officials they have detained, lift the restrictions on telecommunications, and refrain from violence. As I said earlier this week, we will work with our partners to support restoration of democracy and the rule of law and impose consequences on those responsible. Over the past 2 weeks, I've spoken with the leaders of many of our closest friends: Canada, Mexico, the UK, Germany, France, NATO, Japan, South Korea, Australia, to being reforming the habits of cooperation and rebuilding the muscle of democratic alliances that have atrophied over the past few years of neglect and, I would argue, abuse. America and alliances are our greatest asset. And leading with diplomacy means standing shoulder to shoulder with our allies and key partners once again. By leading with diplomacy, we must also mean engaging our adversaries and our competitors diplomatically. where it's in our interest and advance the security of the American people. That's why yesterday the United States and Russia agreed to extend the New START Treaty for 5 years to preserve the only remaining treaty between our countries safeguarding nuclear stability. At the same time, I made it clear to President Putin, in a manner very different from my predecessor, that the days of the United States rolling over in the face of Russia's aggressive actions, interfering with our elections, cyber attacks, poisoning its citizens, are over. We will not hesitate to raise the cost on Russia and defend our vital interest and our people. And we will be more effective in dealing with Russia when we work in coalition and coordination with other like-minded partners. The politically motivated jailing of Alexei Navalny and the Russian efforts to suppress freedom of expression and peaceful assembly are a matter of deep concern to us and the international community. Mr. Navalny, like all Russian citizens, is entitled to his rights under the Russian Constitution. He's been targeted for exposing corruption. He should be released immediately and without condition. We'll also take on directly the challenges posed by our prosperity, security, and democratic values by our most serious competitor, China. We'll confront China's economic abuses, counter its aggressive, coercive action to push back on China's attack on human rights, intellectual property, and global governance. But we are ready to work with Beijing when it's in America's interest to do so. We will compete from a position of strength by building back better at home, working with our allies and partners, renewing our role in international institutions, and reclaiming our credibility and moral authority, much of which has been lost. That's why we moved quickly to begin restoring American engagement internationally and earn back our leadership position, to catalyze global action on shared challenges. On day one, I signed the paperwork to rejoin the Paris Climate Agreement. We're taking steps led by the example of integrating climate objectives across all of our diplomacy and raising the ambition of our climate targets. That way we can challenge other nations, other major emitters, to up the ante on their own commitments. I'll be hosting a Climate Leaders Summit to address the climate crisis on Earth Day of this year. America must lead in the face of this existential threat. And just as with the pandemic, it requires global cooperation. We've also re-engaged with the World Health Organization. That way we can build better global preparedness to counter COVID-19, as well as detect and prevent future pandemics, because there will be more. We've elevated the status of cyber issues within our government, including appointing the first Deputy National Security Advisor for Cyber and Emerging Technology. We're launching an urgent initiative to improve our capability, readiness, and resilience in cyberspace. Today, I'm announcing additional steps to course correct our foreign policy and better unite our democratic values with our diplomatic leadership. To begin, Defense Secretary Austin will be leading a global posture review of our forces so that our military footprint is appropriately aligned with our foreign policy and national security priorities. It will be coordinated across all elements of our national security, with Secretary Austin and Secretary Blinken working in close cooperation. And while this review is taking place, we'll be stopping any planned troop withdrawals from Germany. We're also stepping up our diplomacy to end the war in Yemen, a war which has created a humanitarian and strategic catastrophe. I've asked my Middle East team to ensure our support for the United Nations-led initiative to impose a ceasefire, open humanitarian challenge, and restore long-dormant peace talks. This morning, Secretary Blinken appointed Tim Lenderking, a career foreign policy officer, as our special envoy to the Yemen conflict, and I appreciate him doing this. Tim has lifelong experience in the region, and he'll work with the UN envoy and all parties of the conflict to push for a diplomatic resolution. And Tim's diplomacy will be bolstered by USAID working to ensure that humanitarian aid is reaching the Yemeni people who are suffering unendurable devastation. This war has to end. And to underscore our commitment, we are ending all American support for offensive operations in the war in Yemen, including relevant arms sales. At the same time, Saudi Arabia faces missile attacks, UAV strikes, and other threats from Iranian-supplied forces in multiple countries. We're going to continue to support and help Saudi Arabia defend its sovereignty and its territorial integrity and its people. We also face a crisis of more than 80 million displaced people suffering all around the world. The United States' moral leadership on refugee issues was a point of bipartisan consensus for so many decades when I first got here. We shine the lamp of liberty on oppressed people. We offered safe havens for those fleeing violence or persecution. And our example pushed other nations to open wide their doors as well. So today, I'm approving an executive order to begin the hard work of restoring our refugee admissions program to help meet the unprecedented global need. It's going to take time to rebuild what has been so badly damaged, but that's precisely what we're going to do. This executive order will position us to be able to raise the refugee admissions back up to 125,000 persons for the first full fiscal year of the Biden-Harris administration. And I'm directing the State Department to consult with Congress about making a down payment on that commitment as soon as possible. And to further repair our moral leadership, I'm also issuing a presidential memo to agencies to reinvigorate our leadership on the LGBTQI issues and do it internationally. You know, we'll ensure diplomacy and foreign assistance are working to promote the rights of those individuals, included by combating criminalization and protecting the LGBTQ refugees and asylum seekers. And finally, to successfully reassert our diplomacy and keep Americans safe, prosperous, and free, we must restore the health and morale of our foreign policy institutions. I want the people who work in this building and our embassies and consulates around the world to know I value your expertise and I respect you, and I will have your back. This administration is going to empower you to do your jobs, not target or politicize you. We want a rigorous debate that brings all perspectives and makes room for dissent. That's how we'll get the best possible policy outcomes. So with your help, the United States will again lead, not just by the example of our power, but the power of our example. That's why my administration has already taken the important step to live our domestic values at home, our democratic values at home. Within hours of taking office, I signed an executive order overturning the hateful, discriminatory Muslim ban, reversed the ban on transgender individuals serving in our military. As part of our commitment to truth, transparency, and accountability, we started on day one with daily briefings of the press from the White House. We've reinstituted regular briefings here at State and at the Pentagon. We believe a free press isn't an adversary. Rather, it's essential. A free press is essential to the health of a democracy. We've restored our commitment to science and to create policies grounded in facts and evidence. I suspect Ben Franklin would approve. We've taken steps to acknowledge and address systemic racism and the scourge of white supremacy in our own country. Racial equity will not just be an issue for one department in our administration. It has to be the business of the whole of government in all our federal policies and institutions. All this matters to foreign policy because when we host the Summit of Democracies early in my administration, to rally the nations of the world to defend democracy globally, to push back the authoritarianism as advanced, we'll be a much more credible partner because of these efforts to shore up our own foundations. There's no longer a bright line between foreign and domestic policy. Every action we take in our conduct abroad, we must take with American working families in mind. Advancing a foreign policy for the middle class demands urgent focus on our domestic economic renewal. And that's why I immediately put forth the American Rescue Plan to pull us out of this economic crisis. That's why I signed an executive order strengthening our Buy American policies last week. And that's also why I work with Congress to make far-reaching investments in research and development of transformative technologies. These investments are going to create jobs, maintain America's competitive edge globally, and ensure all Americans share in the dividends. If we invest in ourselves and our people, if we fight to ensure that American businesses are positioned to compete and win on the global stage, if the rules of international trade aren't stacked against us, if our workers and intellectual property are protected, then there's no country on earth, not China or any other country on earth, that can match us. Investing in our diplomacy isn't something we do just because it's the right thing to do for the world. We do it in order to live in peace, security, and prosperity. We do it because it's in our own naked self-interest. When we strengthen our alliances, we amplify our power, as well as our ability to disrupt threats before they can reach our shores. When we invest in economic development of countries, we create new markets for our products and reduce the likelihood of instability, violence, and mass migrations. When we strengthen health systems in far regions of the world, we reduce the risk of future pandemics that could threaten our people and our economy. When we defend equal rights of people the world over, of women and girls, LGBTQ individuals, indigenous communities, and people with disabilities, the people of every ethnic background and religion, we also ensure that those rights are protected for our own children here in America. America cannot afford to be absent any longer on the world stage. I come today to the State Department, an agency as old and as storied as the nation itself, because diplomacy has always been essential to how America writes its own destiny. For the diplomacy of Ben Franklin helped assure the success of our revolution. The vision of the Marshall Plan helped prevent the world from foundering on the wreckage of war. And the passions of Eleanor Roosevelt declared the audacious idea of universal rights that belong to all. The leadership of diplomats of every stripe doing the daily work of engagement created the very idea of a free and interconnected world. We are a country that does big things. American diplomacy makes it happen. And our administration is ready to take up the mantle and lead once again. Thank you all. May God bless you and protect our troops, our diplomats, and our development experts, and all Americans serving in harm's way.
All right, you've been listening to President Biden there giving his first foreign policy speech at the State Department and covering a range of issues, including troops in Germany, talking about Yemen, talking about LGBTQI issues, specifically talking about climate change. Timmy covered a lot of ground.
Yeah, he certainly did. Biden also said that Navalny's arrest is a matter of deep concern and Navalny should be released immediately without condition.
And I think one thing that caught our attention when he talked specifically about China and said that the United States is ready to work with Beijing when in the interest of the United States. All right, so those are some of your headlines. Certainly when it comes to foreign policy, let's get a check on your top business stories. Once again, here is Charlie Pellet.
Thank you very much. We've got 55 minutes to go ahead of the closing bell. U.S. stocks trading at or near session highs right now. In fact, the S&P extending a rally into a fourth day as traders sift through a flurry of corporate results amid signs the labor market may be gradually improving. We'll find out for sure tomorrow morning when we get the latest monthly jobs report, 8:30 a.m. Wall Street time on the jobs report, complete coverage on Bloomberg Radio and Television. S&P up right now by 32 points, trading at a record 38.62, up by about 0.8%. The Dow up 264, up 0.9%. Nasdaq is up 131 points, up now by 1%. 10-year yield 1.13%. Gold down 2.1%, 17.94 the ounce. Silver futures there down 1.9%, and gold, as I mentioned, down 2.1%. Crude oil, West Texas Intermediate, up 1.1%, 56.30 for a barrel of West Texas Intermediate crude. GameStop shares down for a third day in four, falling 37% as retail traders flock to other corners of the stock market, such as small drug developers. Among some of those names, Navnex up more than 50%, Cassava Sciences down 22%, Mankind shares tumbling now by about 2%. Well, as for the overall market backdrop, Jack Ablin is Chief Investment Officer at Crescent Capital, and on Bloomberg Television and Radio this morning, he told us he sees what he calls a you only live once spending, giving a big boost to the U.S. economy. After the bell, we will be hearing...
On this day in Black history in 1996...
After the bell, we will be hearing from Peloton, Gilead Sciences, T-Mobile US, and Pinterest. Recapping S&P up 33, a gain there of 0.9%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's the Thursday Gremlins coming out in full force. Charlie Pellet, thank you so much. Really appreciate that update. Let's not forget, there's a lot going on. We just heard from President Biden giving his first foreign policy speech. We cannot forget, though, kind of on the other end of the spectrum, is we've got the Super Bowl. 55 is happening this weekend. We're typically there at Radio Row, outside of it, talking to all members of the sports community about the big game. It's a different world. It's a COVID world.
Yeah, it's not just different for us and for the players and the viewers, but of course different for the fans who will or will not be in attendance.
Right, exactly. It's going to be much limited and socially distanced. But for most of us, we also will, of course, watch the big game from at home. But one of the things that's always there, no matter what year it is security concerns around the big game and keeping everybody connected. So great to have back with us William Bratton. He's former New York City and Boston Police Commissioner, former chief of the LA Police Department, chairman of Risk Advisory over at Teneo. Commissioner Bratton is on the phone in New York. Also with us is Andreas Orlando. He is president of the public sector and Verizon Connect over at Verizon. He's also a senior VP there, which is investing millions in expanding permanent 5G deployments in and around the Tampa area, around the big game. He joins us on the phone in Atlanta. Gentlemen, so nice to have you here with us. Commissioner Bratton, I want to start with you, and we are going to talk about security around the big game. We've got a nice chunk of time here. I do have to ask you, though, about President Biden, a new administration. When we are talking about foreign policy, we're hearing about a lot of things. When you look at the security and national security of the United States, how do you see it, and what do you see as our biggest concerns right now? Is it domestic terrorism?
My belief is it is domestic terrorism at the moment. They'll always be concerned with international terrorism, but this year I think that has been affected by, particularly after January 6th. The issue of domestic terrorism is first and foremost. International terrorism, interestingly enough, has been relatively quiet as it relates to efforts directed against the United States for a significant number of months now. And I think that's one of the reasons why domestic terrorism is attracting so much attention, because what had been concerned since 9/11 has, in fact, been diminished significantly.
Commissioner Bratton, how do we get that under control in the United States?
It's going to be much, much more difficult. I took over the LAPD in 2002, and at that time, one of the first priorities for me was getting the LAPD up and running to deal with the new threat of international terrorism. Local police forces had very little to do with terrorism concerns prior to 9/11. That was largely responsible for the federal government. After 9/11, we had to focus on it. and have focused on it for the ensuing now almost 20 years. But the issue now is, first and foremost, domestic terrorism, and that's going to be much more difficult because we're very limited in terms of the laws we have, that the laws passed after 9/11 to allow us to more effectively deal with foreign terrorism initiatives. Here in the United States, we don't have a lot of those laws that work so well for us.
So I do want to talk.
The issue.
Go. Please finish.
Go ahead, please.
No. Please finish.
They also have the additional issue in the United States, guns. That we have more guns than people. In the last month, 2 million guns have been sold in the United States.
Wow.
I think that's the highest month ever. And so terrorists would have to basically try and bring guns into. They've already hit that 400 million guns, and people in many states are allowed to carry them openly. In a number of states, Wisconsin, Michigan, they have open carry laws, and people are armed with all types of weapons of war are allowed to mark them out with. So we have a very different situation. It's going to be very difficult to get under control. Right now, it is not under control.
Yeah, that's such a bigger issue. We're going to come back to some more serious topics, but I do want to talk a little bit about the game. I think for me, I kind of was like, oh my God, it's the Super Bowl this weekend, because it just kind of crept up on us in this virtual, socially distanced world. It's just such a different year. Andreas, come on in on it. And we were talking with your team members at Verizon last year, this time in Florida. We were there at the game. Tell us about Verizon and their involvement in making sure that everyone who's in and around the game stays connected and make sure that everybody is safe and secure.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear you talk to our team last year. We have been doing this now side by side with first responders for decades. Every Super Bowl, every major event like this, our teams roll out and have a presence with first responders to ensure that they and the communities that they serve are safe during a big event like the Super Bowl. And this year is no different. The same playbook that we had last year. Obviously, we updated, and we have to account for COVID and some of the unique aspects of this year's events. But we have, again, our Verizon Command Center, which is something we do every year on the ground. We have over 100 engineers and technicians who are monitoring and managing the network around the clock, in and around the actual stadium, Raymond James, where the teams will be playing, but also in the greater Tampa area. And this is an incredible source of pride for our company to ensure that the event goes off without a hitch. We're also on site in the Florida State Joint Emergency Operations Center. This is where all of the law enforcement and public safety agencies, including, of course, the Tampa Police Department, have a presence and are communicating and collaborating real time. And we have a team on the ground as part of that to ensure that we're doing everything we can to help first responders and public safety agencies make this event as safe as it possibly can. And as I said, COVID changes some of the dynamic of the game and of the situation, but our commitment as America's #1 network for public safety remains the same. It's twofold. One, we're working overtime to ensure that first responders stay connected when it matters most, and whether that's on our 4G LTE network, America's most reliable, or on our 5G network, the world's fastest and most advanced. And two, we are working with first responders in the public safety community to make sure they have the most advanced solutions and technologies they need to keep the community and themselves safe. And what is generally a pretty safe event, but a lot goes into making it that way. And obviously, there's always risks for things to happen.
Well, and Commissioner Bratton, come on back in on this conversation, because what's different about this year's security plans around the big game versus what we've seen in years past when it's a much more quote unquote normal year?
Several things. First off, there's significant focus on COVID this year. Large part of the public safety focus on the idea of trying to the best of their ability encourage the social distancing, wearing of masks, to do that with minimal, if you will, use of police resources for that other than encouraging that they be worn and the social distancing. But the security issue this year is multifaceted because of COVID. Good news is that I was just speaking to the chief of the Tampa Police Department this morning, coordinating the over 70 agencies that will be involved in the public safety effort down there. And they believe at this juncture that there's no direct threat, either international terrorism or domestic terrorism, directed against the event. That's good news. And they will watch that very closely in the run-up to the event. But after the events of January 6th, there were concerns would there be demonstrations in Tampa around the issues that were in the forefront of the January 6th event. And there is no evidence that that's going to happen down there. That's the good news.
Well, how has the role of law enforcement changed in the wake of what we saw on January 6th? How has the thinking around law enforcement changed, now getting that clear indication that this is such an issue in this country?
Well, it is the point I was making earlier that they're here, that they don't have to try to get into the country illegally. They don't have to create a cell. They're already here, and they are heavily armed. They are incredibly well trained. I'm talking about the far-right militants, that some of these militias and Proud Boy types that are out there. And that is of concern. And we are also very limited in our ability to monitor some of their activities because, again, this is domestic terrorism rather than international terrorism. So that's a significant limitation. And the technology of today, we've been talking about technology, and thankfully Verizon's bringing the latest technology that there is to this event. But a lot of the technology is now capable of being encrypted. So that significantly mitigates law enforcement's ability to monitor and keep control over what's going on here. But right now, as of this morning, talking to the chief and then the sources I deal with in the policing world, that there is no indication of direct threats against the event. It's a very different event, certainly, than what was going on in Washington on January 6th, which was political. This is celebratory sports. And I think we're going to have a very safe event, a very happy event. And I know which team I'll be rooting for.
Who is it?
Hey, born in Boston, you inoculated.
All right.
You sound like our producer, Paul Brennan.
You can take Tom Brady out of Boston, right?
What?
Well, New York, L.A., I always had to root for not the hometown team, but my hometown of Boston. So same thing this year.
Andreas, come back in here because in terms of the way the network is working at the game, I'm wondering how you and Verizon think about prioritizing certain services at a game like this. For example, making sure fans can access Instagram or communicate with one another or communicate with people back home versus police and first responders being able to communicate with one another.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's something that is relevant to an event like the Super Bowl, but it's something that we think about in the operation of our network every single day. So obviously, for an event like the Super Bowl, we reinforce the network. We add a lot of capacity and bandwidth so that our customers will all be able to use the network in the ways that they would like. Of course, with 5G, where we've made a significant investment, there's even greater bandwidth and speed and characteristics of the network that will help customers. In Tampa alone, in anticipation of this event, we've invested over $80 million in 5G. Tampa is one of 64 cities across the country now that have our 5G services. And so there will be plenty of bandwidth and capacity on the network to manage the demand. Now, obviously, with first responders and public safety, they have the highest level of priority on our network, and we've built into our network, not just for the Super Bowl, but for every day and for every part of the country where first responders have access to voice priority and data priority. And then if and when our network becomes congested ever, they also have preemption where we put first responders and the public safety community above everyone else to get access to that network if that's necessary. It's not often necessary given how robustly we build our networks, but yes, first responders and the public safety community have the highest level of access on our network every day, but that will be true at the Super Bowl as well.
So, and have you, Andreas, in terms of working from home, is this something that all of a sudden we've kind of had to learn even more about, kind of managing bandwidth? I mean, have you guys learned a lot with everybody working at home and tapping into networks?
Absolutely. We have, and I think we've talked quite publicly about this in some of our earnings calls and other settings, but early on in the pandemic, we saw a massive increase in use of our network. Lots of video, as you can imagine. Gaming really took off, and while we maintained our capacity and our usage to capacity, which is a really important metric that we watch in our networks, in a constant throughout that period. It's clear that people working from home, the pandemic has changed the way. In my space, I run the public sector part of our business. We've seen governments work differently. We've seen people work from home. We've seen uses of the network that didn't exist before, and it's been very instructive. And candidly, it's very timely for the nationwide rollout of 5G. Because the unique characteristics of 5G really are revolutionary. They're not incremental to 4G. The speeds that we've never seen before, the latency characteristics, these are all going to make the kinds of use cases that the pandemic has highlighted. They're going to make them even more possible. So it's a good time technologically for the changes that we're seeing in usage patterns.
Commissioner Bratton, I wanted to shift gears a little bit and talk with you about your thoughts around defunding the police. It's something that we heard a lot about over the summer in the wake of the death of George Floyd. And I think there's a lot of questions around what people mean when they say defund the police. But the Brookings Institution says it means reallocating or redirecting funding away from the police department in order to fund other government agencies funded by the local municipality. What are your thoughts when you hear defund the police?
Well, I think the issue is that term was really taken out of context in terms of how it was initially presented. The idea of taking money, resources away from the police and putting them someplace else at a time when actually there's an increased need for police services. Police leaders are not opposed to the idea of defunding if it is for purposes of reallocation of resources to take some responsibilities away from the police that are better situated elsewhere, particularly dealing with mental health issues, dealing with a myriad of issues that could be handled by other city agencies more appropriately. But oftentimes, they would need to collaborate with the police. That there are very few things that the police deal with that can be handled exclusively by another agency. This is where the importance of technology, such as what Verizon provides, is so important, that this need to have collaborative interoperability, so that if money is given over to a city agency to improve their mental health resources and ability to respond to mental health calls along with the police, they're going to need to have to be able to talk with the police. And they're going to need to be able to have radio systems and data systems and video systems that allow them to have seamless interoperability. And what Verizon has been doing, and so exciting, is that over these last 20 years, they've been able to pull that off. And so going forward, there will be efforts to take resources away from the police and put them more appropriately elsewhere. The term defunding, however, is taken on a negative context. The idea, some places talking about taking police and reducing the size of the police force, et cetera. But it's a term that needs to be thought through a lot more.
Got it. Bill, we've got to jump in because we're running out of time here. Both of you, thank you so much. Bill Bratton, Chairman of Risk Advisory over at Teneo Risk, and of course, Andreas Orlando over at Verizon. He's President of Public Sector, of course, looking ahead to security ahead of the big game and some other topics. This is Bloomberg.
Broadcasting live to New York, Bloomberg 1130. To Washington, D.C., Bloomberg 99.1. To Boston, Bloomberg 1061. To San Francisco, Bloomberg 960. To the country, Sirius XM Channel 119. And around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Business Week.
You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week. That time of the day, chart of the day.
Yeah, chart of the day, song of the day.
You've been doing fairly well.
Okay.
Yeah, you have been. All right, we're going to get to Dave Wilson in just a moment. First up, though, let's check in once again with Charlie Pellet, see what's going on in the trading day. Hey, Charlie.
Well, hello there. We got 28 minutes to go ahead of the closing bell. After the bell, we will be hearing from Peloton, Gilead Sciences, T-Mobile US, as well as Pinterest. We're looking at an update here with the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ trading close to session highs. Could see a record today for the S&P right now up 31 points, 38.61. That is a gain of 0.8%. The Dow's up 254, also up by about 0.8%. NASDAQ is up 132, up by 1%. 10-year yield 1.13%. Gold is down $40 the ounce, dropping 2.1% to $17.94. Silver futures down 1.8% today. Crude West Texas Intermediate 56.27 a barrel for WTI. That is a gain right now of just about 1%. The University of Oxford is set to begin a trial combining COVID-19 vaccines from AstraZeneca and Pfizer that could provide greater flexibility in the use of scarce supplies. AstraZeneca ADR is up 0.7%. Pfizer up right now by 0.3%. A major issue in the U.S. and indeed much of the world continues to be getting those doses into people's arms. Dr. Jason Farley is a nursing professor at Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health.
Right now, most states across the United States are in Group 1C, which would indicate that we're vaccinating those 65 years of age and older. And it did expand in that group to more frontline individuals, frontline healthcare workers and essential workers were included in that group. But many healthy individuals in there, below 65 with maybe, a few comorbidities, not severely ill, are still waiting in line.
The Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health is supported by Michael R. Bloomberg, founder of Bloomberg LP and Bloomberg Philanthropies. Among some of the other vaccine names that we track today, we've got BioNTech down 0.1%, Moderna up now by 3.7%, Johnson & Johnson up by 0.6%. Again, recapping, equities higher, on track for a possible record here with the S&P up 31, up now by 0.8% at 38.61. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Thank you, Charlie Pellet.
Yeah. 2014, so relatively new.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah,
Certainly not his newest by any means, but he's had a couple of records out since then.
Yeah, it's interesting. The sound is a little different, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I really like it. I really like it. Okay, so chart of the day, you're looking at, I think, value stocks.
Right. You might like the sound of the song, but you wouldn't like the valuation that's been going on with the value stocks, the ones that are relatively cheap by comparison with earnings or sales or asset values or whatever, because they've been down a hole when it comes to a comparison of price-earnings ratios. And it's something that Keith Lerner, who's the chief market strategist at SunTrust Private Wealth Management, cited in a report out yesterday, so it got my attention. And what I did was, look at these forward ratios. They're based on the projected earnings over the next 12 months, and just run a comparison that shows you how cheap or expensive the value side of the equation, represented by the Russell 1000 Value Index, is relative to its growth counterpart. And what's happened is, you go back to the beginning of September, you saw a discount of 43% for value relative to growth. You move forward to November, it was almost 43%. You move forward to last week, again, almost 43%. So, as much as these stocks have, received some more interest in the past few months, it really hasn't allowed them to get out of this valuation hole. And the way Lerner sees it, it's going to take some improvement in earnings on a relative basis because, a lot of these companies in the value category, they've been suffering from falling profits over time. So you got to see that turn around. You got to see price trends turn around. And so that's what it's going to take before you get to the point where, say, you would want to favor value, or as he put it, go overweight. Have a bit more invested in those kinds of shares than might be reasonable given their benchmarks. If you want to know more, folks, send me an email. I'll get you the chart, the explanation that goes with it, and everything I do going forward. The email address is dwilson@bloomberg.net. That's dwilson@bloomberg.net.
Okay, so Dave, so the optimistic view of this chart could be, they could be a value at some point soon, or as you mentioned, overweight as part of a portfolio. What are the signs that this analyst says to look for?
Well, I mean, like I say, as far as earnings go, they've started to stabilize. That you're not seeing, the declines that you saw in the past few years for the value stock-oriented companies on the profit front. So you got to see that do better, especially in relative terms, because let's face it, you think about, the fastest growing companies, their earnings go up and up and up. That's sort of the way it's been going over time. So they have a lot to compete against. And I should note, by the way, which I didn't earlier, when we talk about this 43% gap, it's the widest since December 2000.
Yeah.
It just shows you how skewed things have become away from value and toward growth, kind of consistent with just a straight comparison of the indexes over time.
It's rock'em sock'em robots between value and growth. Like, it just keeps going. Like, we have a lot of value people like, it's going to happen. It's going to happen. And then the gap still exists.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the last few months, you started to hear that kind of ramp up because there was some real interest, especially starting in September. But, even with that, you got this hole, and the value stocks are still stuck in it.
All right, Dave, thank you so much. Just want to mention Microchip came out with their earnings while we were talking. Third quarter adjusted EPS, $1.62. That is 4 pennies better than what Wall Street was forecasting. Third quarter net sales were up about 5% year over year. And they're talking about the fourth quarter adjusted EPS of $1.67 to $1.79. Ticker is MCHP. And that is above the estimate that folks were looking for the fourth quarter. And fourth quarter net sales, they're talking about $1.42 billion to $1.49. The stock's been up for most of the day. I was just trying to see if it got a little bit of a blip on it, but right now it's up about 3.6%. It's a little bit off its highs of the days, but it's one of those chip players I like to keep an eye on. It's a $37 billion market cap.
And we're also expecting Peloton earnings after the bell today, so we'll bring those to you live when we get them.
Exactly.
This is Bloomberg.
And right now, let's get a check on world and national news. Over to Nancy Lyons in D.C. Hey, Nance.
Hey, Carol. Well, in his first foreign policy address since taking office, President Biden called on Russia to release President Putin's adversary, Alexei Navalny. And he also says Russian aggression will no longer be tolerated by the U.S.
I made it clear to President Putin, in a manner very different from my predecessor, that the days of the United States rolling over in the face of Russia's aggressive actions, interfering with our elections, cyber attacks, poisoning its citizens are over. We will not hesitate to raise the cost on Russia and defend our vital interest and our people.
He also outlined a series of foreign policy initiatives, including an executive order on the U.S. refugee admissions program. House impeachment managers are asking former President Trump to testify under oath for his Senate impeachment trial. No word yet from Trump to their letter. If he refuses to appear, the managers say they'll use his refusal against him in the trial, which is set to begin February 9th. Well, you cannot check the label on this one, but some baby food may contain toxic metals.
A report from a House Oversight Subcommittee finds commercial baby foods are often contaminated with significant levels of arsenic, lead, mercury, and other heavy metals. The report calls on the the Food and Drug Administration to set maximum levels of toxic heavy metals in baby foods and for the companies to test their finished products, not just individual ingredients. The report also suggests baby food makers voluntarily phase out ingredients like rice, which tend to test high for heavy metals. In Washington, I'm Nathan Hager, Bloomberg Radio.
Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Nancy Lyons.
All right, Nance, thank you so much. Carol Master along with Tim Stanovic. And man, I love real estate stories.
Yeah, I do too. And you know what? So do terminal users as well, because they're frequently among the most read at any given moment.
That is so true. And there's a couple on the terminal, one by Ashra Carmiel. She covers everything in Manhattan. She's such a prolific reporter when it comes to real estate. And one of her stories, she says, the headline is Manhattan apartment buyers are coming back after almost a year away. And this is one of those things that we've been talking about with, our various real estate guests is, okay, is everybody going to stay away from the big cities?
Yeah, look, it hasn't been, every borough hasn't been treated equally over this last year. The New York's costliest borough, which of course is Manhattan, finally saw purchase contracts for co-ops and condos double in January from the same month in 2020. That's according to Miller Samuel and Douglas Elliman Real Estate. They said that in a report today.
Yes.
Second straight month.
Yeah, and that's pretty interesting, right? Second straight month, you said, in which deals top pre-pandemic levels. January's increase, though, larger by far. But listen, I think this is going to be key because we've seen a lot of people really run away from the city. It kind of breaks my heart to see how quiet the city is, the stores that are gone, and just the level of activity. It's just so quiet, especially with restaurants shut. But nonetheless, I think this is pretty significant.
Yeah, low mortgage rates have something to do with it, of course. And then also sellers are becoming more and more willing to negotiate when it comes to pricing.
That was a big part of it. They said for a long time, sellers were like, I'm not going to sell.
If they didn't need to sell, why sell?
Right, exactly, especially when prices were taking a hit. The other story we've got by John Gittleson, also great when it comes to commercial real estate. He says Tishman Speyer, the Manhattan-based owner of Rockefeller Center, buying its first buildings in Austin.
There it is. It feels like so many people and companies are moving to Austin, Texas. The price for the properties in the Texas capital, which has emerged as a tech hub, was between $145 million and $150 million. That's according to a person with knowledge of the deal.
I remember one of our guests we had recently who talked about like 80 offers on a home in Austin. It was just crazy.
Wow.
Yeah, exactly. You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week right here on Bloomberg Radio.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. Stocks trading close to session highs. S&P heading for a record. Let's head right over to the first word breaking news desk for today's afternoon call. Here he is, Bill Maloney.
And good afternoon, Charlie. That's right. U.S. stocks are climbing today with the Dow currently up 286 points. S&P's gained 33. NASDAQ rises by 132. The U.S. 10-year yield at 1.14%. Gold is lower by 39. And transports gain 130 points. Among the main 11 S&P sectors, leaders were financials and tech. Only materials fell. And leaders to the upside in the Dow were Visa and Travelers, while UNH and Merck led to the downside. After earnings, Qualcomm plunged 9%, while eBay and PayPal traded to record highs. And in deal news, according to sources, CoStar considers a new bid for CoreLogic. In other news, Netflix spiked intraday on a report they will raise prices by as much as 13% in Japan. And wrapping things up, Wynn Resorts reports after the bell. Live from the first breaking news desk, I'm Bill Maloney. Charlie?
Okay, we thank you very much, Bill Maloney. And to hear live breaking news over your Bloomberg type squawk, SQUAWK on your terminal. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
I'm driving in my car. I turn on the radio.
How about you let me drive?
Oh, no.
Who's gonna drive you home?
Honey, please, I'll do the driving.
Drive on.
Excuse me, I want to drive.
Just drive, baby.
It's the question that drives us.
This is the drive to the close.
That funky music will drive us till the dawn.
On Bloomberg Radio.
All right, just about 11 minutes left in today's trading day. It is time for the drive to the close. Back with us is Sean Cruz, Senior Market Strategist at TD Ameritrade. Back with us on the phone from Chicago. Sean, good to have you here with us. How are you? Is Sean there? We might be having some technical problems, so we're hopefully going to get that line connected up so we can bring in Sean in just a moment.
You said it was Thursday. Sometimes the gremlins come out on
They hit us at the top of the show, didn't they?
Yeah, that's what happens. Did I hear Sean there? Sean, are you there?
Yep.
Ah, welcome. Hey, nice to have you back with us. Before we get into kind of your thoughts on the market and the trade, what do you make? You guys are also a zero commission trading platform. What do you make of what has been going on with these meme stocks, GameStop and the like?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly is going to drive a lot of interest, and those names are going to be volatile as you start to see the trade get one-sided, and what you can attribute that to, be it interest from chat rooms on social media or hedge funds, short interest, whatever it might be. I mean, those names are going to be a little bit more volatile, so we just try and tell our clients to make sure they understand the risk of what they're getting into when they do decide to enter into these trades.
Did you see a lot of trading activity on your platform as well?
We saw some elevated trading activity last week, and it's typical of what we see. It's just in general in markets when you start to see volatility move higher, whether it be just the overall VIX in and of itself, or whether you see specific names start to show elevated volatility. It does drive a lot of client interest, and it's not just on the equity trading front, but also on the derivative trading front as well.
Are you at all concerned about the type of interest that it drives?
As long as we feel comfortable with the overall risk of what's going on, and we feel that the clients are able to handle and manage that risk, that's something that we keep an eye on, and we certainly want to enable clients to trade whatever it is that they want to trade. But we do monitor these names and pretty much anything else across our book our clients are trading. We do monitor that on an ongoing basis, and that's continuous throughout the day.
Right. Did you guys have to shut any trading down because of these? I'm just curious.
Last week, we didn't shut down trading. If clients wanted to come in and buy or sell these names, they certainly could. We did increase margin requirements, and we also limited what clients were able to do on the derivative trading fronts. For instance, we weren't allowing just selling naked calls, for instance, in some of these highly volatile names, and that's just because of the inherent risk that can come if you are just short a call in the stock. makes what happened in some cases last week, a 7 sigma move. And we also put a few controls on what we're allowed in terms of spread trading as well.
Sean, I want to get your thoughts on earnings that we saw this week, Alphabet and Amazon, and wondering if that changes, strong earnings, of course. I mean, for Amazon, it was its first year that we saw $1 billion a day. Revenue exceeded that for the company. And then Alphabet also topping expectations from analysts. What are the signs this gives you about the economy and the recovery that we're seeing?
I think it was interesting in Amazon's release. Well, one, there was, I think, a lot of what was in that release fell in the shadow of Jeff Bezos,
that is true,
executive chairman. But it was an incredibly strong report, and I think there was a few interesting things to take away. One, the head of Amazon Web Services stepping up in that CEO role, I think, gives a little bit of an indication of what the business is going to focus on moving forward. The other thing, though, was on the retail front. They actually said even as we move into the recovery this year, they still expect demand for e-commerce to remain strong. And I think that was something a lot of investors were asking themselves, not just about Amazon, but a lot of these names that thrived over the past year and had some pretty strong upside move and some great returns, was whether or not that was all pull forward and then there's not going to be as strong growth or the business is going to maybe fall off a little bit as we get into this more reopened return to some sort of normalcy, whatever that ends up looking like, what that would really mean for the businesses. And I think they're able to reassure investors that they are still expecting demand to remain strong. And we saw that not only maybe help sentiment around Amazon itself, but names like Shopify, names like eBay also benefited from that because they didn't just say it was going to be Amazon in specific. They said there's an overall general trend. They expect e-commerce to remain strong this year.
Hey, I'm curious. We talked a little bit about the VIX yesterday. It's definitely come down from the recent spike that we just saw, certainly last week amid the volatility. How closely do you watch the VIX as an indicator? And if so, what is it telling you right now?
So the VIX, I kind of view it in sort of three buckets. And so when in the 20 to 25 bucket, that means there's some cautious optimism out there, and that's where we're at right now. 25 to 30 is genuine uncertainty. And anytime you get north of 30, there is a caution tone. It's really setting in across the market. And I think last week, when you had a lot of this volatility being driven in a handful of names, the question for markets wasn't is GameStop doing what's going to really cause this issue in GameStop itself. The question the markets weren't sure was, would this turn into a systemic issue? And I think that's what drove it higher. As we get further away and we realize that we are returning some sense of normalcy, this isn't going to become a systemic issue across the board for equities. That's what allowed the volatility index to really pull back as much as it did. I expected as we got further away from last week that we would see the VIX moving lower, but I did not expect to see it down at 22. But I think that just shows that the market is moving away from focusing on what we saw last week, and they're returning to focusing on things that matter. Economic reports are coming out. We're getting continue to get a lot of earnings reports out, and those are coming in as expected, in many cases better. And I think that's really is what the market's focused on, and they're becoming more optimistic.
Sean, in 20 seconds, tomorrow's jobs report, what are you expecting, looking for? 20 seconds.
I actually think we're going to see a little bit of a pullback in wage growth, and that's because in the ADP report, we saw that services jobs, leisure and hospitality, had a pretty strong rebound, which is good overall, but that will sort of drag that average wage number down because those tend to be lower paying jobs. So I'm going to be interested to see what happens with the wage growth number.
All right, we're going to leave it on that note. Hey, Sean, thank you so much. Sean Cruz, Senior Market Strategist at TD Ameritrade, with us from Chicago. Right now I'm looking at the EcoGo page on the Bloomberg, and change in non-farm payrolls, we're looking for about 100,000 tomorrow, according to our estimate of economists, and that's a gain of 100,000 versus a loss of 140,000 the month before.
All right, well, we're going to have to wait and see.
Yeah, absolutely. This is Bloomberg. Here comes the close.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. Records on Wall Street for the S&P and NASDAQ. A move higher as well for the Dow. Stocks closing at or near session highs. This update brought to you by Witham, a forward-thinking advisory and accounting firm offering industry expertise and innovative solutions for your business. Experience the Witham way. Innovative, adaptive, effective, trusted. Visit Witham.com for more. Stocks extended their rally into a fourth day as traders sifted through a flurry of corporate results amid signs the labor market may be gradually improving. Tomorrow morning we get the jobs report, 8:30 a.m. Wall Street time, complete coverage on Bloomberg Radio and Television. S&P up 41 to a record 3871. That was a gain of 1.1%. The Dow up 332, higher by 1.1%. NASDAQ at a record 13,777, up 167 points, up 1.2%. NASDAQ so far this very young year up by 6.9%. 10-year yield 1.13%. Gold down $40 the ounce to $17.94, a drop of 2.2%. Silver down today by 1.8%. West Texas Intermediate up 1.2%, 56.37 a barrel. So it was an up day across the board. What about the strength of earnings? Andrew Sliman is head of Applied Equity Advisors at Morgan Stanley Investment Management, and he says you can't ignore the strength of big earnings beats.
My experience is, maybe the stocks were hot going into earnings season, but you don't want to sell stocks that have that magnitude of beat, and that's a very bullish sign. I think that's why the market really hasn't taken, any pullbacks this month yet because of these beats.
One of the day's big beats, Parker maker Canada Goose Holdings up the most since 2018. Revenue and earnings came in well above analyst estimates. Shares surged 21%. An update, records for Wall Street. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Wild thing, think you move me.
I got a few moves I know you'll like.
Shaking all over.
Bloomberg Business Week. Movers and shakers.
Shaken, not stirring.
On Bloomberg Radio.
All right, everyone. Time to take a look at the trade. What I really want to do is kind of get right to some earnings because we are waiting Ford and Peloton, but I just see that Wynn Resorts just crossing the Bloomberg terminal. And if I may just take a quick look, fourth quarter adjusted loss of $2.45 a share. That compares with an estimated loss of $2.40, so a little bit of a deeper loss there. Fourth quarter operating revenue, $686 million. That's a little bit better than what was forecast, which was $676.5 million. And a quick check on what that stock is doing in the after hours. It's unchanged.
We're also seeing earnings from T-Mobile. The company is reporting earnings of 60 cents in the fourth quarter. The company in reporting revenue of $20.34 billion. Estimates were at 19.74, so a beat there.
Right. Just a quick check on shares of T-Mobile. They're up just about 0.5% here in the after hours. Peloton is crossing the Bloomberg, and second quarter revenue, $1.06 billion versus $1.03 billion, and it's boosting its annual forecast.
Wow, look at that. Peloton sees fiscal year revenue at least $4.08 billion. That's up from $3.9 billion. Connected fitness subscribers in its second quarter, 1.67 million, above estimates of 1.64 million.
Yeah, and listen, the shares were up in today's session, up about 7%. They're now down more than 4% in the after hours. So also disclosing some metrics that let investors see if customers are spinning on those bikes or using them as a coat rack. We'll see how many workouts the One Peloton community did in the quarter. That's coming from our own Nico Grant, so we're going to follow. But right now, Peloton down more than 5% in the after hours. Bloomberg News cross-asset reporter Sarah Ponzak also joining us. Sarah, where do you want to go?
Peloton, because Peloton is representative not just of a fitness community, an at-home workout bike, but also it's really representative of your stay-at-home stock from 2020 and throughout the COVID-19 era. And a concern heading into the earnings season was that we would start to get evidence that while we had plenty of demand for these types of stocks in 2020, that maybe you weren't going to start to see that fade. Now, what's interesting about the Peloton numbers, just looking at it first glance, is that You see fitness subscribers beat estimates, you see revenue beat estimates, but Peloton's saying it can't keep up with demand and profits are going to be squeezed. And with that, we see shares now down about 6.5% in the post-market trade. But you just have to keep in mind, I mean, the expectations baked into these stock prices, Peloton's up more than 370% in the last year alone. So you really got to put it all in perspective.
Wow, and what a problem to have, Sarah, right? Peloton saying that it can't keep up with surging demand. Quote, West Coast port delays and COVID-related factors continue to present challenges to returning our delivery times to pre-pandemic levels.
Right, and it's interesting to see that they're still facing such demand at a time when you have the vaccine rollout. People might believe that they can see the light at the end of the tunnel. They can see the day that they will feel comfortable going back to a gym or going back to a workout class. And yet, you still see this tremendous demand that Peloton is faced with.
Yeah, exactly. Just another quick check on the stock in the after hours, down about 3%. As you said, though, listen, this was one of the pandemic stocks, up 434%, as Sarah mentioned, in 2020. So, right, the expectations are really high. Our own Nico Grant on our live earnings blog on Peloton saying that this was, I believe, the company's first $1 billion sales quarter.
Wow.
Yeah. So pretty significant. Yeah, I mean, listen, Sarah, and this is where we're going to be looking at fundamentals, wondering, again, these pandemic stocks that really took off as a result of the environment we were in and starting to see maybe as things start to get back to normal or things slow down, but, whether or not they continue that momentum. I do also want to mention Ford coming out, fourth quarter adjusted EPS of 34 cents a share. It was for an estimated loss of 7 cents a share. So Ford crossing also with earnings. And let's do a quick check on what that stock is doing in the after hours. It is, Sarah, it's up about it's bouncing around. So it's a little bit lower now. Now it's down about 1.5%. So we're seeing some big trades. I mean, listen, earnings, it's a reminder we've gotten through a lot, but we've got to keep a watch on them.
Oh, certainly. And it's been an interesting earnings season. We have seen plenty of attention turned elsewhere, even though many, many companies have beat. We're at about an 80% beat rate, which would be very high historically. You still look at the average stock in 24 hours after reporting, and you see a loss of 1%. So that just shows expectations are pretty high. And even though the majority of companies are beating by a wide historical margin, and there's still some jitters out there.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, good stuff. Sarah, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. This is Bloomberg.
All right, Dave, you're up. Hi, my name is Dave.
Wilson, where are you? Wilson!
Just what do you think you're doing, Dave?
We're going for a price on Wilson.
Open up the door, it's Dave! Who? Dave!
Hey, Mr. Wilson!
Hey, Mr. Wilson. Good Thursday afternoon. It is great to have you back here with us. Stock of the day, what is it?
Advanced Drainage Systems, Tim. It's a maker of water and sewer pipes and related products. Company was founded in 1966 and went public in 2014. The ticker is WMF, so it's sort of like water management solutions, if you like. Advanced Drainage shares have been on a tear in the past couple of years. They rose 60% in 2019 and then jumped 115% in 2020. Now, this year, Advanced Drainage had been up and down before today's release of fiscal third quarter results. Those figures sent the shares to their biggest gain ever. Here's why. Revenue beat analysts' average estimate in the Bloomberg survey by the most in any quarter since it went public. Residential sales led the way by jumping 36%. Earnings surpassed projections. Oh, and the company raised full-year forecast. In response to all this, Advanced Drainage's share price reached triple digits for the first time ever. The stock rose as high as $103.91 and closed at $103.46, and that works out to a gain of about 21%.
That's a big one. No doubt about it. All right, Dave, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Peloton still down more than 4% in the after hours, Tim.
Mark Gurman says it all has to do with Peloton continuing to report supply chain constraints and seeing squeezed profits because of that.
Because then you have to worry, do customers say, you know what, I can't get it? Maybe I can get something different, but I can get something similar elsewhere. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Tomorrow's Friday.
See you then.
All right. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Let's get back to world and national news. Hey, Nancy Lyons.
Hey, Carol. President Biden says the U.S. has been through a difficult few years, but while visiting the State Department this afternoon, he pledged a new course in foreign policy.
America is back. Diplomacy is back.
He announced several foreign policy moves, saying he'll halt the withdrawal of U.S. troops stationed in Germany and end support for Saudi Arabia's military offensive in Yemen. Former President Donald Trump is being asked to deliver testimony in the Senate's impeachment trial next week. House impeachment managers have sent a letter to Trump calling for him to testify either before or during the trial about his conduct on January 6th. Laurie Levinson is a legal analyst from Loyola Law School.
Trump is between a rock and a hard place. If he doesn't testify, then he really hasn't explained why he thinks that the election was stolen, nor why his words didn't incite the insurrection. If he does try to testify, I think that the Democrats could be very effective in cross-examination.
Well, House Democrats are heading into a showdown with Republicans over GOP Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene and her support of QAnon conspiracy theories. She spoke on the House floor this afternoon.
I think it's important for all of us to remember none of us are perfect. None of us are. And none of us can even come close to earning our way into heaven just by our acts and our works. But it's only through the grace of God.
A vote is expected soon on whether to remove Greene from her assigned committees. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Nancy Lyons.
All right, Nance, thank you so much. I want to get right back to earnings. Charlie Pellet is with me, and I know you're all over these numbers as well. We're watching all of our earnings blogs. Ford came out with their earnings, Charlie, and we're looking at Ford now up about 2% in the after hours. Fourth quarter adjusted EPS of 34 cents a share. That was compared to a loss that was forecast of 7 cents a share. So that is a big, big difference. Also looking at some of the headlines, the company raises planned investment in EVs and AV leadership to $29 billion. So more involvement there. Sees 2021 adjusted free cash flow of $3.5 to $4.5 billion. And investors seem to be liking what they heard from Ford.
Indeed, you cannot underestimate, too, what Ford is saying about its investments in electric vehicles. Clearly, we've seen moves from General Motors as well, Volkswagen. Clearly, that is the direction that they want to take the industry. If we can move on to another earnings report, Carol Massar, after the closing bell, that's Pinterest, ticker there, PINS. I'm looking at this stock surging after hours by 9.6% right now on shares of Pinterest. Revenue jumped thanks to a strong holiday season. Sales there topping analyst estimates. The shopping season did start earlier than expected, and it drove advertisers online because of the coronavirus. Just should point out Pinterest, of course, based in San Francisco.
All right, so Pinterest rallying. Snap, however, selling off, and that stock is down more than 9% here in the after hours. Fourth quarter revenue, it was a beat, $911.3 million versus $856.1 million. Fourth quarter adjusted EPS was also a beat of 9 cents versus an estimate of 6.7. Company giving some indications of the outlook. Sees first quarter revenue of $720 to $740 million versus an estimate of $705.1 million. We're going to try to dig a little bit deeper into that and understand a little bit why investors are not so happy. And then there's Peloton.
Exactly. Very briefly, though, on Snap, just very briefly there, daily active users, 265 million. That daily active users number is a very closely watched metric.
All right, good stuff, as always. And Peloton down more than 4%. Thanks, Charlie.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. Ford's fourth quarter adjusted EPS beat estimates. Ford says it will double investment in electric cars through 2025. Ford shares up now by just about 3%. Pinterest out with quarterly sales that beat analyst estimates on a holiday shopping season that started earlier than expected and drove advertisers online due to the coronavirus. For right now, shares of Pinterest up by 11.1%. Records on Wall Street today. Stocks extended their rally into a fourth day as traders sorted through a flurry of corporate results amid signs that the labor market may be gradually improving. S&P 500 index up 41, a gain of 1.1%. The Dow up 332, up by 1.1%. Nasdaq up 167, a gain of 1.2%. 10-year yield 1.13%. Gold down 2.2%. Silver down 1.8%. West Texas Intermediate crude up 1.3%, 56.40 a barrel. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Really appreciate that update. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Massar in our Interactive Brokers studio. And this story caught my attention, and I feel like it plays into some of the earnings we also just got on Peloton. And it's also a reminder of an interview we did a few months ago with the CEO of Whirlpool, who said that consumers, after a year of staying home and doing things, cooking at home in his world, changing their consumption habits, how that was unlikely to change anytime soon. So here with more on how COVID is shifting human behavior around the world. Sometimes that means using a Peloton, which we just heard when we got their earnings. It's all part of a series called Story Threads that you can find at Bloomberg.com. Matt Townsend is editor at Bloomberg News. He's on the phone in Brooklyn. Matt, so good to have you here. So tell us about your story, what you kind of set out to do. And I know you guys have kind of been tracking things throughout the shutdown and the pandemic.
Yeah, since May, we've been obviously reporting tons of stories on just sort of what's been changing, how companies are responding, sort of aggregating all together in one spot on Bloomberg.com. And almost every week, or basically every week, new stories being published, basically showing, the profound impact of COVID on the consumer world, consumer behavior. And the big theme we're seeing is millions of people, or even billions of people, have tried things for the first time and are basically realizing, do I need to go back to the old way once I can? And what we're seeing is that a lot of people probably won't. And I'm talking about things like, not many people have done digital doctor visits, right? Mm-hmm. Now that's a huge part of people's lives, and there's tons of money going into it. We think about movie theaters, right? You brought up Peloton. So many things have been done for the first time or just accelerated during COVID. And the more reporting we do, the more that we see that so much of this is going to stick. And we think that's, what the profound impact of COVID will be looking back in a few years.
It's interesting, too, in part of this series that you guys are doing, you had to buy the numbers of 270 billion potential reduction in annual miles driven in the United States. You talked about 330% Zoom's fourth quarter estimated sales gain and 155% Target's online revenue growth from August to September. I have a feeling you can see the idea of doing a video conference, I think, with family beforehand was kind of not the norm. And now it's like, exactly. Yeah, I want to see you if I'm going to talk to you.
Yeah, and I'm not. We don't think that this is all going to stay exactly the way it is during the pandemic, but there will. Some of it's going to stick, and that's sort of like where we're presenting. These are where the investment opportunities are. These are the potential, sort of star companies of the future. Obviously Zoom being one of them. You brought up Peloton. We've seen tons of money going into online grocery because we think about a behavior that people did just sort of every week. Matter of fact, I'm at the grocery store, but millions of people all over the world for the first time have done online grocery shopping.
Right.
And we don't know exactly how much of it's going to stick, but it is. Some of it is, and there's so much opportunity, especially in a lot of these markets where people are just really doing e-commerce for the first time. I had a story recently about, markets like India, Mexico, and Brazil. Really what the pandemic did is jump-started them into the modern e-commerce world. And it's just, the amount of growth and the potential for those markets is just, astronomical.
Yeah, and I do wonder, are there differences geographically, Matt, as you guys are doing your reporting and you've done a lot of global, you're doing it on a global scale, like, are you seeing differences, or has the pandemic, like you said, I mean, you just talked about one market, but I do wonder, are a lot of these trends kind of, we're seeing it all around the world?
We are seeing it all around the world. Like Mexico is a really interesting case. Before the pandemic, e-commerce was not really a big thing there for many reasons. One, it was just people don't have not a lot of people have bank accounts. They deal more with cash. They're weary of getting their goods. And because the pandemic hit and they had to shop online, all these companies had to pivot really quickly and said, how do we make it easy for people to shop online? People, basically saying they cover that market, it accelerated things maybe 5 years, maybe 10. So in the U.S., a lot of people are already doing online shopping. They were doing more of it, doing different categories. But for some place like Mexico, I mean, they just sort of went from almost no e-commerce to a robust e-commerce economy.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable. And it's kind of been fascinating to talk to CEOs who said, we were planning to do even like things like working from home. We were thinking about, over the next couple of years, and then all of a sudden it's like, we're there. What does it mean? I'm curious if any of your reporting, in terms of how you see this playing out, what does it mean for property needs and real estate needs? Because I am wondering, as I look around New York and there's so much stuff shut down, I just wonder what this means longer term.
Yeah, it's a big question mark. Basically what we've heard, our reporting shows that the bottom end of the market is in a lot of trouble in commercial real estate, whether it's malls or sort of commercial districts. But the really good spots, the good malls, the high streets, a lot of that should come back pretty strong. And the one thing that we'll probably see is a lot more of these digital brands, retailers, online retailers that maybe had a couple stores. They'll see this as an opportunity to really expand their brick and mortar footprint at maybe a discount as a way to take even more market share from the established players. Like think about, a company like Gap losing more market share to startups and things like that. So I wouldn't say all hope is lost for commercial real estate, but it definitely is a huge transition. And the bottom of the market looks like it's definitely in trouble.
All right, interesting. Yeah, I do feel like certainly when it comes to retail, it wasn't a new story of some of the retail shops that were struggling, but it certainly picked up some momentum in terms of them not really being able to survive. Matt Townsend, great to hear your voice. He's editor at Bloomberg News, joining us on the phone from Brooklyn. Check out the story threads, features. You can find them at Bloomberg.com. This is Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Nasser, and this is Bloomberg.
Broadcasting live to New York, Bloomberg 1130. To Washington, D.C., Bloomberg 99.1. To Boston, Bloomberg 106.1. To San Francisco, Bloomberg 960. To the country, Sirius XM Channel 119. And around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Business Week.
You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Masser in our Interactive Brokers studio. Coming up, we're going to talk with one entrepreneur who started a company that's all about really connecting employees with their companies, but it's kind of fascinating, and it's a way of really talking about what's going on at the company in terms of diversity and inclusion and demographics. So we'll get into that in just a moment. First up, though, back to your top business stories and a look at some of the earnings after the close. Charlie, it's been pretty busy.
It has been very busy indeed, but that's what we do here at Bloomberg. Carol Masser, let us begin with Peloton Interactive. Says it can't keep up with surging demand for the company's connected exercise machines. It did warn that profit will be squeezed as it tries to fix the problem. Shares now down by about 6% on Peloton in extended trading. Pinterest reported quarterly sales that topped analyst estimates on a holiday shopping season that started earlier than expected and drove advertisers online because of the coronavirus. Shares gaining about 8.5% in extended trading. Ford reporting a big beat for the fourth quarter on strong North American sales of its cash cow F-150 pickup. Also boosted its ante in the race to develop electric and self-driving vehicles with a $29 billion investment. Ford shares after hours up now by about 3%. An update on Wall Street. Stocks extended their rally into a fourth day as traders parsed a flurry of corporate results amid signs the labor market may be gradually improving. S&P 500 index at a record today, up 41, up 1.1%. The Dow up 332, up 1.1%. NASDAQ up 167, up 1.2%. 10-year yield 1.13%. Gold down $41 the ounce at $17.92, down 2.2%. West Texas Intermediate crude up 1.2%, $56.38 a barrel. Now, what about the economic outlook? Dana Peterson is chief economist at the Conference Board.
We are looking at potential upgrades to our forecast for the second quarter, given the fact that there is still a very high likelihood that there will be some fiscal supports coming through. It's not clear how big it'll be. Certainly, the current administration is thinking about more targeted stimulus checks. And also you have the Republican Party coming out with a program that's, roughly $900 billion rather than 1.9. But we're still looking to see that there could be potentially be some strength in the second quarter of this year.
Merck says Kenneth Frazier plans to retire as chief executive officer after almost a decade leading the drug maker. Frazier is just one of 4 black chief executives in the Fortune 500. Recapping, stocks higher. S&P at a record, up 41, up 1.1%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week on this Thursday. Carol Masser at Bloomberg headquarters in New York City. Well, the backstory on our next guest company's name will tell you a lot about what they hope to be doing, and that is creating a safer workplace for employees, just like Canaries did in the coal mines. Let's bring in Mandy Price. She is CEO and co-founder of Canaries. It's a platform for compiling and tracking demographic data for companies. It's also pulling in together data on employees, executive leadership, and governing boards. Her company works with the likes of Yum Brands, Neiman Marcus, and the Dallas Mavericks, among others. And Mandy joins us on the phone in Dallas. Mandy, welcome to Bloomberg.
Hi, Carol. How are you?
I'm doing well. Tell us a little bit more about your company and what you are doing and really what you've set out to do. I'm curious how you got there in the first place.
Yeah, sure. So as a woman of color, I had challenges in the workplace like many underrepresented employees face, but I had the also unique perspective and experience of helping to drive my organization's diversity initiatives. So I was on my law firm. Before Canaries, I was a practicing attorney, and as far as with the Women's Task Force, the hiring committee, and also leading up the Black ERG group. So I knew the unique challenges that organizations had, really trying to move these initiatives forward, and knew that there needed to be a way for organizations to really measure and track their progress. What we see is that a lot of organizations are measuring diversity and tracking that, but we have to go beyond that. We have to really be able to have a measurement tool for equity and inclusion and ensure that we're creating that workplace where everyone thrives.
How do you measure that?
So we do all kinds of assessments. We do assessments not only with respect to the employees, but also assessments with respect to the company's policies, practices, the way the organization is operating. We know that the systems we put in place can perpetuate inequities. And so that's one of the first things we do when we're working with a client is sit down and really looking at not only their talent acquisition, the performance management, the way their pay structures are set up, to ensure that we're putting in research best practices to ensure we are reducing those inequities that exist within the workplace.
Well, because it's interesting, and I am curious in your own personal experience when you're working at the law firm and then, you know, maybe putting your company together, raising money. I mean, what are the structural problems that you see that currently exist in our system that really prevent equality and diversity and inclusion to its fullest extent?
Well, Carol, we'll be here all day.
Yeah, there's an easy question.
Go through all of those.
But I love talking to leaders like you because I get a better understanding, especially if you've seen something firsthand. Like, because you know this better than I do, Mandy. We've been talking about this for decades, and I do hope that things are changing in the past year. That it's not just about talking; it's about actions, being deliberate, being intentional, so that the systems change and that we do create a much more equal society.
Yeah, no, you're spot on. And I think what we're starting to see is that organizations understand that they have to have a systems-based approach because for so long what we heard and what the organization's focus was on increasing the pipeline. They felt that, you know, the entire issue was really around the pipeline, the talent acquisition system, but that's just one piece of the pie. And so what we need to do and what research has shown, right, when we look at McKinsey and Lean In's report, every year, they've been doing it for 5, I believe it's going to be the 6th year, they see that only a handful of the organizations have the systems and structures in place to actually reduce the inequities that we see from an organizational standpoint. So I think the fact that we're starting to think about this from an organizational intervention perspective, as opposed to relying only on those individual interventions, which we have typically seen instead of some type of unconscious bias training or other DI compliance training that's really based off reducing discrimination, which really doesn't get to the heart of the issue as far as our systems and our policies. Now, Carol, I'm going to highlight just a couple of things, like I said, that organizations can do from a structural standpoint. But even when we look at things like,
well, you know what, Mandy, hang on for a second, because I have to do a little bit of news, and I don't want to interrupt you, and I want you to be able to go through these points. So hold on for a second, and we'll go through that when we come back right after we do some news. We're going to get back to Mandy Price. She's CEO and co-founder of Canaries. It's a platform for compiling and tracking demographic data for companies, and it looks at things like governing boards and executive leadership, and it's all about really creating a much more equal and diverse and inclusive workplace. So we'll get back to that in just a moment. Right now, I do want to get back to world and national news and back on over to Nancy Lyons in our 99.1 newsroom in the nation's capital. Hey, Nancy.
Thanks, Carol. After a series of phone calls to reestablish relationship with allies from Canada to France to South Korea, President Biden spent the afternoon at the State Department to boost the role of diplomacy in advancing American interests.
The president renewed the nuclear arms reduction treaty with Russia, as he also demanded the release from prison of opposition leader Alexei Navalny.
I made it clear to President Putin, in a manner very different from my predecessor, that the days of the United States rolling over in the face of Russia's aggressive actions, interfering with our elections, cyber attacks, poisoning its citizens, are over. We will not hesitate to raise the cost on Russia and defend our vital interest and our people.
The president said he would deal with China similarly, and he warned the Burmese military would face international consequences for forcibly overturning a democratic election. In Washington, Irv Chapman, Bloomberg Radio.
Well, the House is expected to remove Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia from her committees because of her extreme views. In remarks on the House floor today, Greene disavowed her past support for QAnon.
These were words of the past, and these things do not represent me. They do not represent my district, and they do not represent my values.
The House can pass the vote with a simple majority. Former President Trump's legal team did not take long to turn down a request for Trump to testify at his impeachment trial. House impeachment managers issued the request in a letter to Trump. And now there are multiple agencies reporting that Trump's attorneys have responded in a letter saying that the request is a sign that the House cannot prove its allegations against Trump. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries.
All right, Nance, thank you so much. You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Massar joining me once again is Charlie Pellet of Bloomberg News. And this story caught our attention by our own Jenny Serrain of Bloomberg, Charlie. And it talks about American Express. They're adding some perks. They're tweaking the rewards on their gold card as the company is really striving to hold on to some of its affluent customers. It's really been hard for all of these card companies in a world where we get points by spending, often by traveling, and we're not doing it. So, and especially those cards where you're paying kind of an annual charge, they've got to figure out ways to keep customers kind of happy.
Indeed, and this story speaks right to our audience, affluent customers. I guarantee 100% of our listeners have some kind of a premium credit card in their wallet or in their pocketbook that gets some kind of benefits. And the issue comes down to this. These cards can be an unbelievable bargain, even at $550 a year from some of the super high-end cards, with a proviso: if you use the benefits. However, if your wings have been clipped, you've got to stay at home, you're not going out to eat, you're not traveling, you're not staying at hotels, for many of our listeners, that's $550 out the window. What happens to companies like American Express? They've got to rejigger the product so that people will actually go ahead and use the cards and derive benefits that they perceive to be worthwhile.
And folks, can I just tell you, Charlie Pellet is not only amazing and a great Bloomberg News reporter and anchor, he's also someone who understands credit cards. No, you do. Like, you understand the perks. And if you don't make use of them, then they're not worth it sometimes.
Well, I would argue, and I would suggest that to the credit card companies, I'm a lousy customer. Why? Because I make full use of the benefits, and I look forward to paying the credit card bill when it comes.
Right. And so, in other words, you're not carrying balances and you're not racking up all of those fees. Well, this is an interesting one, and they're talking about Amex customers with the $250 a year card. They're now going to get a $10 monthly credit for purchases made with Uber technology. So that's what they're doing in terms of adding up a perk. Charlie Pellet, you're the best. Thank you. This is Bloomberg Radio.
events, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. Lots of earnings after the bell. Peloton Interactive says it can't keep up with surging demand for the company's connected exercise machines, and it's warning that profit will be squeezed as it tries to fix the problem. Shares now lower by about 8% in extended trading. Pinterest shares surging 7.5%. Quarterly sales there topped estimates. Also reporting after the bell. Ford, little change right now, have been up as much as 3%. Right now, we'll call it virtually flat after hours. Ford reporting a big beat for the fourth quarter on strong North American sales of its cash cow F-150 pickup. Also, it is spending $29 billion on electric and self-driving vehicles. Records on Wall Street today as investors take apart the latest earnings reports. S&P up 41, a gain of 1.1% to a record 3871. The Dow up 332, up 1.1%. NASDAQ up 167, also a record, up 1.2%. 10-year yield 1.13%. Gold down $41 the ounce, a drop of 2.2%. Silver down today by 2%. West Texas Intermediate crude 56.31 a barrel, up 1.1%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. I want to get back to Mandy Price, CEO and co-founder of Canaries, a platform that she has created, and she's still with us on the phone in Dallas, Texas. So, Mandy, I kind of asked you a loaded question and a big question that, as you said, we could probably talk for hours about it in terms of how do we really get to changes when it comes to D&I and equities within the workplace. And you said you had some points that you wanted to make. So let me toss it back to you.
Yeah, so some of the things we do when we're working with our clients, right? Because what you hit on is exactly the problem that a lot of organizations and leaders have, which is, where do I even start, right? How do we even start thinking about this from a systems and organizational perspective? And so some of the things we do is help them with that diagnosis. So we're looking at things like when we look at your pay practices, are you basing pay in someone's salary? Are you looking at prior salary history to determine their current salary? Or are you looking at just the job and the experience required for the job? Because we know that these pay disparities and equities exist within our society. So when we do that common practice that most organizations do, which is using salary history in the interview and hiring process, what we see is that organizations have these disparities that are coming into their own workplace that they didn't intend just because of the disparities that exist in society. And so those are the types of analysis and reviews that we do to ensure that we're having a sound structure and policy within our organization to reduce and eliminate these inequities as much as possible.
Now, I have to say, in planning for this interview, our producer, Donnie, who was involved in it, and he said, what's interesting, too, is they've got this platform that basically lets, various employees, from what I understand, is, if they want to post something on their employer, they can do it anonymously. And that is, I think, even fairly prominent on your website. Talk to us about why this is such an important ability to be able to do.
Yeah, it's critical because unless employees have a safe way to provide feedback, organizations don't know the opportunities that exist within their workplace. That safe mechanism to allow employees to provide that feedback so that organizations can make the needed change. One of the things that's also really we've had our system set up is because talent says that looking for an employer that values diversity, equity, and inclusion is one of the most important things for a potential employer. So we have a lot of potential applicants that come to our platform looking at companies' diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives, which we all track on our platform as well, to really learn what are the employers of choice in the companies that values really reflect their own values.
And, the other thing, sorry, the line was going in and out a little bit, so I just want to make sure you had finished. One of the other things, and I am curious, when you start working with a company, is like, what is the first thing that you want to look at, and what is the kind of most common problem that you find when it comes to these issues at a company?
So the most common problem that we see is that organizations haven't been measuring and tracking this at all. They measure diversity, but they're not measuring equity and inclusion or looking at their systems from this kind of equity and inclusion lens. And so, which is really baffling, right?
And they're different, right? They're different.
Yeah, they're different. You know, when we think about diversity, diversity is, you know, individuals' identity. That's gender, that's race, that's, you know, your religious background. Those are all diversity factors. When we think about inclusion, that is, I feel like I belong in this workplace no matter what my identity is. And then when we think about equity, that is, I have the same access and opportunities no matter what my identity is either. And so it's important for organizations to not only look at diversity and to have that measurement around diversity, but to really make sure that they're measuring inclusion and equity within their organization as well.
Hey, one of the things I wanted to ask you, your own experience in creating a company, raising funding for that company, what was it like? How hard was it as a woman?
So it was difficult. I mean, when we look at the funding disparities that exist for women and then also women of color, it's vast. You know, women of color only receive 0.6% of venture capital funding, so not even one. And when you look at the amount of funding received, it's at much lower rate. So, you know, we encountered a lot of challenges, and one of the things, just why, you know, diversity is so important in the corporate setting, is to ensure that we're getting that diversity of opinion and perspectives and experiences. But what we've seen in venture capital is the same, is that there's not a lot of diversity with respect to venture capitalists. And so it's hard sometimes to see the opportunity that exists within various markets. So I know when we first started Canaries, it was 3 years ago. It was before the emphasis that we're seeing now on corporate diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives. And we had a lot of venture capitalists that couldn't see the potential in the company and didn't really understand the market potential. And so I think that's why it's so key and critical that we have diversity, not only within a corporate setting, but within every ecosystem, including the venture capital ecosystem.
Right. I feel like from all the conversations I've had, it's going to be, you know, we talk about pipelines, but it's going to be everywhere. And getting entrepreneurs certainly into the investment world and having the ability to bring, especially minority entrepreneurs, to bring their ideas out is really, really key. Quickly, 20 seconds, a piece of advice for entrepreneurs who are looking to fund, who might be coming up against closed doors?
I would say to never give up. You have to be tenacious to be an entrepreneur. You got to have a lot of grit, and you got to believe in yourself. So that would be my key word of advice, is to keep going.
Yeah, it's a good one. It's a simple one, but it's a good one. No doubt about it. Mandy, thank you so much. And I hope we can check in again down the road. She's co-founder and chief executive officer of Canaries, on the phone from Dallas, Texas. Well, he is back. Kevin Cirilli, Sound On, is coming up next.
Don't make it sound so ominous, Carol.
I was welcoming you. Could you feel the warmth and the love?
I woke up from a 2-week nap. I was in a 2-week slumber. Now I'm back. I've got my energy. And we've got Senator Marsha Blackburn. And you don't want to miss this interview. I was up on Capitol Hill earlier today. And I mean, let me tell you something. She is the Republican in the eye of the storm for all of big tech. Everyone talks about Josh Hawley. Yeah. Senator Blackburn of Tennessee is really the one. GameStop, everything, all of it. Robinhood. So I asked her about all of that. Plus impeachment. There's another trial, Carol.
I cannot believe it. And I think we saw the headline today that the president or former president, Donald Trump, will not be testifying. Is that correct?
Yeah, correct. And in fact, she, and I asked her about this in the interview, and what she told me essentially was she's making this case, and Republicans as well, that if you open the door to a previous impeachment of a former president, who's to say in the future someone wouldn't vote once they have the majority in both houses to go backwards and